excluded, but my honourable friend with the Rhondda was absolutely right in his question. And at a time when more local areas are facing lockdowns, can I also urge ministers to do far more to help those who've fallen through the gaps, at the very least to address the issue of the 5-week wait for universal credit? It should be a grant and not an advance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I can absolutely assure the honourable lady that there will never be a moment when the government or the Wales office sits back and think that we've done enough as far as this is concerned. We are always striving. We will always strive to make sure that we improve every one of the schemes we've got, and where there are gaps which we've identified before, and colleagues on this side of the House have also been helpful in that respect, we will do everything we can to make sure they are plugged.
Jonathan Edwards.
Number 2, Mr. Speaker.
Secretary of State.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I will answer questions 5, 6, 7, 8 and 9 together. The Government's response to the UK internal market consultation published last week highlighted the broad support for the proposals from businesses and job creators in Wales. The bill gives businesses the continued certainty of seamless trade across the UK as the transition period ends.
Jonathan Edwards.
Okay, Mr. Speaker. Much of the rhetoric around the internal market bill is that it's a shared asset, yet what's missing is any shared intergovernmental structures. On Owain Glyndŵr Day, why won't the British government be honest for once and admit that they're using consequential legislation resulting from Brexit, such as the internal market bill, to effectively reassert direct Westminster rule over Wales?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I disagree with the fundamental premise of the honourable gentleman's question. The reason I do that is this went to public consultation, and the public response to these proposals, and I will quote one business in Wales, promoting Wales, employing people in Wales, contributing to the Welsh economy. It says the UK bill will be the making of the UK. And it seems to me that the comments relating to UKIM are divided into politicians who are anxious to protect their sort of cosy clique in Cardiff, and business and employers and public in Wales who recognise that this is an important part of the next stage of our economic recovery.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The proposals in this bill are designed to make sure that the ease with which UK businesses can trade across our 4 home nations continues to be enjoyed in a way that helps them invest and create jobs, just as it has done for hundreds of years. Therefore, it is extremely important that businesses are on board and happy with the proposals that we have put forward. Can the Secretary of State tell us what conversations he's had with businesses across Wales about these proposals and outline what sort of response he has received?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My honourable friend raises an interesting point. We've had numerous engagements in person with the Business Secretary and others, also in online engagements, and I can safely assure the House that those who have responded have not expressed in any way any great concerns about UKIM. In fact, they see it as a perfectly natural successor to the existing status quo. They want us to proceed with it. They consider it to be fair, and most importantly, they consider that jobs depend on it.
Tommy Shepherd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ministers seem to be in a state of denial as to what this internal market bill actually says. It is quite clear that it will give the power to the UK government to make spending decisions in Wales on matters which are devolved to the Welsh Parliament. So can he tell the House how on earth that respects the devolution settlement?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman, it illustrates my point that it seems that certainly in certain nationalist quarters, this is all about politics and all about power, whereas in fact it's all about jobs and it's all about the economy and it's all about people grafting to find their way out of a post-COVID situation. I can tell him that there isn't a single power, not one, which Welsh Government will not have after this bill is completed. In fact, it will have 70 new ones. The fact that UK Government is going to be there as well to contribute to the economy of Wales in a way it hasn't been able to do for 45 years should be welcomed by he and his colleagues in Wales as a major step forward.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Next spring at Milton Keynes Theatre will host the Welsh National Opera, a great historic institution in Milton Keynes, hosting a great Welsh institution. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that it's not just the free movement of goods, but also the free movement of people, of culture, of ideas and of values between our 4 nations that makes our union so strong?
Mr. Speaker, that is a wholly appropriate question, because what it enables me to say is, of course, that sometimes when we talk about the strength of the union, we limit ourselves to simply talking about economic activity. But my honourable friend is right to point out that the union is magical for a whole lot of other reasons too, and the cultural, social elements that he describes absolutely sum up why the union is important, and actually why some of the legislation and some of the ideas we're talking about enhance that, they encourage that, and they will finance that over the coming years.
Craig Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I echo the public consultation around the Internal Market Bill, and can I reinforce the reality in Mid Wales and Montgomeryshire, economic activity, transport links, and indeed our public services look to the West Midlands economy, and my constituents and businesses have been looking at the progress of this bill. They welcome it, they want it, and they don't want the distraction of Cardiff Bay politicians or nationalist politicians distracting from the fact that they would welcome investment, and I look forward to lobbying the Secretary of State and the Department for Transport to build things like the Middletown bypass.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I mean, I'm a former resident of my honourable friend's constituency, and I know exactly what he is referring to. And it's worth reminding ourselves that actually a quarter of the workforce of his own constituency actually cross the border every day to make a living and cross back again in the evening. It has to be a porous border. The worst thing for jobs and economic recovery in Mid Wales, or indeed anywhere else, are artificial political boundaries put up for the advantages of a few people, as I say, in a cosy arrangement in Cardiff. We're talking about proper jobs, proper people, proper parts of Wales which require and should deserve the support of all of the parties, including the nationalists who make so much noise about this but never actually deliver.
First of two questions, Liv Saville-Roberts.
On the 8th of July, the Secretary of State, in response to a question from my friend, the Honourable Member for Ceredigion, said that ending our relationship with Europe would allow public bodies in Wales to buy more local goods, more local products and more local services. Yet his own government's UK Internal Market Bill appears to block local measures that would prioritise local goods or services over those from other parts of the UK. How does he reconcile these two positions now?
Reconcile the position, Mr. Speaker, by not recognising the claim that is being made. The UK Internal Market Bill, if the public consultation is ended to go by, forget what us politicians may say, welcomes the idea because it secures as a market that has been enjoyed for hundreds of years. People see it as logical. They see it as a perfectly reasonable step forward to enshrine in UK law what has hitherto, or for 45 years, been conducted in Brussels. They see that as good for jobs, and the Honourable Lady seems to have some objection to that.
Roberts.
Well, he said it, and it was in the white paper. Procurement was mentioned there, and I think that given that that's one of the weapons in the armoury of the Welsh Government in which to support businesses, that it will be fair to expect something on that here. But I will move on. Today marks, of course, the anniversary of the proclamation of Owen Glyndŵr as Prince of Wales at the first Senedd, or Parliament, in Machynlleth.
There wasn't one.
There was a Senedd in Machynlleth. 2020 saw the renaming of the Assembly as Senedd, or Welsh Parliament.
There wasn't.
Maybe the significance is lost in a certain Welsh MP. Maybe the significance is lost in translation.
Order. We're not having the debate on the benches. Please have the discussion outside afterwards and let me know the result of that discussion. Let's have a look.
Maybe even the debate is lost entirely here or lost in translation, Mr. Speaker. But how can he reconcile this historical serendipity with his government's brazen power grab?
Mr. Speaker, it seems astounding to me that on the one hand the Labour opposition consider the UKIP to be a threat to the Union, and the Nationalists consider it to be a threat to separatism. I think they should continue their debate so that they can inform the rest of the House to what their objection is. But the idea that a piece of legislation which results in 17 new powers and none being removed as a power grab is a definition of power grab that I don't recognise.
Shadow Minister Gerald Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last year, the party opposite promised to strengthen the union and strengthen the devolved settlements. But their internal market bill does exactly the opposite, as the Secretary of State's colleague, David Melding, knows. So will he accept that rather than being about promising more powers to Wales, promises we simply cannot believe, the government's internal markets bill actually rolls back the powers, undermines the devolution settlement and gives comfort to those who want to break up the union?
Mr. Speaker, the answer to that question is no, no and no. The reason being that when it comes to testing the temperature and mood of the people of Wales, I rely on public consultations and my engagement with businesses, employers, north, south, east, west and mid, and none of them make the claims that the Honourable Gentleman has. They see this as a perfectly natural transition from EU rule to UK and Welsh Government collaborative operations from Wales. That seems to them to be perfectly sensible. It seems to me to be perfectly sensible. And again, it seems that the objection to this is one about politics and power rather than about jobs and livelihoods.
More. We all know the only person the Secretary of State listens to is the number 10 chief advisor, like every other member of the governing party. The reality is, Mr. Speaker, that Brexit Minister in the Welsh Government, Jerry Miles, has been very clear. There are no new devolution powers. They are within the existing rules of devolution. Members can pontificate all they like. The reality is, Mr. Speaker, they're trying to roll back devolution because they don't like what the people of Wales do when it comes to Welsh Government elections by electing Labour-led governments. This is a reversal of 20 years of the Tories not liking who is elected to government in Wales.
Secretary of State.
Mr. Speaker, I think the Honourable Gentleman needs to remind himself that there wasn't a single seat in Wales where Labour didn't lose votes at the last election. He needs to be a little careful. He needs to, with respect, be a little careful about making accusations based on the sort of the political reality. The economic reality is the people of Wales do not share his enthusiasm for defining this next stage of our sort of post-COVID and post-Brexit evolution purely on sort of political one-upmanship. They want to see jobs and investment, and that's what we intend to deliver.
Kevin Brennan.
Number 14, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, the Secretary of State and myself have had regular discussions with Welsh ministers, including the First Minister, on a wide range of matters, including preparations for the end of the transition period. Preparations for the end of the year are well advanced and build on the plans we had in place for a no-deal scenario in 2019.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. When he has those discussions with the First Minister, has he discussed how the so-called shared prosperity fund will be spent in Wales? Yeah. Because far from the, I don't know if you've seen any opinion polls recently, but far from people in Wales regarding the Welsh Government as a cosy clique in Cardiff, as the Secretary of State puts it, they far prefer them to a swivel-eyed bunch of incompetents in Westminster to run their affairs. And so therefore, could he commit to the House now that every penny of that money will be allowed to be spent by the democratically elected government in Cardiff?
Well, Mr. Speaker, there are no swivel-eyed eyes on this side of the House, and if the honourable gentleman ought to restrain himself a little. I don't think anyone would want to be looking at his eyes at the moment. The reality is, Mr. Speaker, that far more people have voted for members of Parliament in Wales than members of the Welsh Assembly. The turnout is always higher, which rather rebuts his point. But obviously, the Shared Prosperity Fund, which we've already said will match the amount of money that came from the European Union, will of course be spent in Wales after discussions with ministers in both the Senedd and in Parliament.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister will be aware of the news overnight that Hitachi have decided to pull out of the project to build the Wolfenawedd nuclear power station on Anglesey, a project which is of strategic importance to the Welsh economy, but also helps the UK meet its net zero target by 2050. So can I ask my honourable friend if he would leave no stone unturned in his quest to see whether there's a way forward for this project, and in particular if he would continue his discussions with ministerial colleagues here and in Cardiff Bay, and also continue working with the honourable member for Ynys-Môn, who's worked so hard to get this project moving.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very happy to confirm that already my right honourable friend has had discussions with Horizon about this. The announcement was deeply disappointing for all of us and came on the back of concerns which Hitachi had, so I'm told, about the situation with COVID and the Japanese economy. Nonetheless, Wilbur is one of the best sites in the world in which to build a nuclear power station, and I understand that already Horizon have been sounding out the possibility of this project going ahead with other developers.
16 withdrawn, so can you do a substantive question, Minister, from Geraint Davis? Come on, do the question and then I'll come back. Minister, you have to do the lead-in.
Well, Mr. Speaker, high street banks have been at the forefront of lending to firms impacted by COVID-19. They provided support to Welsh firms through over £1.1 billion worth of loans under the government's bounce back loan scheme, £300 million of loans under the Corona Business Interruption Loan Scheme, and there has also been an additional £100 million of lending through the Development Bank of Wales, which has been a very useful contribution.
Let's head over to New York with Geraint Davis.
Thank you very much. Over here in Wales, the Development Bank of Wales has been found by the Welsh Affairs Select Committee to be much more effective in delivering coronavirus loans to business than high street banks, which are found to be unresponsive, delayed, risk-averse, not understanding local businesses. So will the Secretary of State and Minister impress upon the Chancellor the need to provide more funding for the Development Bank of Wales and to import this excellent idea into England to help all British business?
Minister Davis.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I suppose it wouldn't come as a great surprise to the honourable gentleman or anyone who understands economics as he does that a high street bank is always going to be slightly more risk averse than a bank which is backed by the UK Treasury. But nonetheless, I would just draw his attention to the figures I gave earlier, which show that about £1.4 billion has been lent out to businesses in Wales via high street banks on the utilising government schemes. £100 million has come via the Development Bank for Wales. This isn't some sort of a competition. We welcome every single pound that has been lent out to Welsh businesses, no matter where it's come from.
More.
Number 18, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, obviously my honourable friend will be aware that testing for COVID in Wales is a matter for the Welsh Government, and we respect the devolved responsibilities that they have. I also understand that testing in Wales, which would be a responsibility of the Welsh Government have decided to seek support from the UK Government, and so the Department for Health and Social Care have been working directly with them to offer any help they need to deliver an efficient testing and analysis programme.
Robbie Moore.
Thank my right honourable friend for a response. We've made huge progress in rapidly scaling up our testing capacity, and I've witnessed this for myself in my constituency of Keighley, but there is always more that we can do. So what steps is my right honourable friend taking to explore with the Welsh Government the benefits of repeat population testing? And if it proves effective, how can this be scaled up across Wales and the rest of the UK?
Yeah. Well, as my right honourable friend will be aware, we've made enormous strides in increasing the amount of daily testing that is available, but it is not yet enough in either Wales or England or elsewhere in the United Kingdom to meet the huge rise in demand that we've seen over the last few weeks. So the UK Government have set a target of 500,000 a day testing capacity for the end of October, and we're also increasing the number of testing sites to 500 by the end of October. So across Wales and the United Kingdom, we are working very hard. Governments of all sorts of different political persuasions are working hard and working together to increase testing and to meet the demand that is there.
Fair Jones.
Thank you. Number 19, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. By the end of July, more than 400,000 Welsh jobs have been supported by the Coronavirus Job Retention Scheme, while £295 million has been provided to support 110,000 self-employed people. Since the start of March, that's at least 510,000 people in Wales who've been supported directly by the UK government.
Fair Jones.
I thank my right honourable friend for that answer. More than 77,000 meals were enjoyed in Brecon and Bradleyshire as part of the Eat Out to Help Out scheme created by the UK Treasury. This provided a very welcome boost to the hospitality and tourism sectors in my constituency, which I particularly welcome as those are sectors that largely employ more women than men. Would my right honourable friend join me in encouraging the Welsh Government to do their part, create a similar scheme and get more women back into the workplace?
My honourable friend makes a really good point, and having visited her constituency, I think, twice in the recent past, I know just how much she's done to promote these schemes. There is another value, Mr. Speaker, to the Eat Out Help Out scheme, which perhaps we can use this opportunity to, and that is reminding everybody, whether members of the public or members of this House, for that matter, of the importance of supporting local businesses in every possible way that we can as we climb out of this horrible few months. And the work that my honourable friend has done and that of the Treasury, I think, has been a pretty good start.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A key element in supporting people back into work is access to high-speed broadband, particularly in rural areas. Would my right honourable friend join me in welcoming the first broadband USO connection in Wales, which was launched last week in Tregeiriog in the Ceiriog Valley in my constituency of Clwyd South, as part of the government's, across the UK, their Universal Service Obligation Scheme to improve broadband where it is currently running at a low level?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My friend is a solid champion of this particular cause. There are 3,500 premises in Clwyd South and over 200,000 in Wales that have access to full fibre connection. But as he says himself, this is only the start. So those businesses, those individuals who operate and really need high-quality broadband, the clock is ticking in their favour, and this will help jobs and families and prosperity in Wales.
Lucy Powell.
Question number 21, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The UK government shares the steel industry's ambitions for a sustainable future in Wales, and that is why the Business Secretary, Chancellor and I worked to reach an agreement with CELSA, which saved hundreds of jobs in Wales. I have frequent discussions with Cabinet colleagues about supporting Welsh steel industry, especially in dealing with the impact of COVID-19.
Lucy Powell.
I thank the Secretary of State for that answer. In the debate held in this House the other evening, led by my honourable friend, the member for Newport East, we heard about how the Welsh steel sector has been so adversely affected by this economic crisis. The response from the Minister was yet again, I'm afraid, lots of warm words. When are we going to see more action, notwithstanding CELSA, but more action to support this vital industry in Wales to save jobs and the economy?
Secretary of State.
Mr. Speaker, I mean, I would like to think that warm words are better than cold words, and I think that the action speaks louder than words, whatever temperature they may come at. And the fact is that UK government absolutely recognise the importance of the sector. That's why we did the deal with CELSA. That's why we saved 800 jobs there, and that sends a message to other steel producers in Wales that we do mean business. We're not just talking about the survival of the industry during COVID. We're talking about having a significant steel manufacturing presence in Wales in 5 years, 10 years and 15 years, and that is why we continue these discussions. And the CELSA deal ought to be a source of encouragement for everyone involved that actually, when it comes to it, we do mean business.
We now come to Prime Minister's questions, and I call. Just let people just settle down, Prime Minister. Congratulations on the christening. We now come to Prime Minister's questions. Number 1, James Daly. James Daly.
Number 1, Mr. Speaker.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, today marks 400 years since the sailing of the Mayflower, and this is a reminder to us of the beginning of an enduring alliance between our two nations. Around 35 million Americans today trace their ancestry to a Mayflower passenger, and I'm sure the whole House want to join me in marking this historic anniversary. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
James.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. On National Teaching Assistants Day, will the Prime Minister join me in thanking teachers, teaching assistants and all support staff for the extraordinary work they're undertaking to bring our children back to schools, colleges and nurseries in COVID-secure environments throughout Bury, Ramsbottom and Tottington? And will he update the House on implementation of the National Tutoring Programme, as many of the most vulnerable and disadvantaged children in my seat need this help at the earliest opportunity?
Well, Mr. Speaker, can I strongly echo his congratulations and his thanks to teachers, and just say that I believe personally passionately in the tutoring programme that we're launching, and we expect the first group of tutors to be supporting schools from November, with provision ramping up through the remainder of the autumn and spring term.
We now come to Angela Rayner, who's Deputy Leader. Deputy Leader Angela.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And many people in the chamber today, Mr. Speaker, will think the Battle of Britain is today. But actually, we marked the 80th anniversary of those veterans yesterday. And I want to put on record our thanks to all those who fought for our country in the past. Mr. Speaker, I want to start by reading the Prime Minister a message that I've received from a man called Keir. Keir wasn't able to go to work today, and his children couldn't go to school because his family had to wait for their coronavirus test results, despite the Prime Minister promise of results within 24 hours. Yeah. Keir was able to do the right thing and self-isolate and work from home. But other people aren't in this position, Mr. Speaker. Many of them are the very people who are getting us through this crisis, like the care workers that I used to work alongside before I was elected to this House. The Prime Minister once earned £2,300 an hour. So can the Prime Minister tell us what is the average hourly rate of a care worker in this country?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I congratulate the the honourable lady on her elevation, and just to say that she speaks of the constituent Keir, and I can tell her allegedly, apparently, Mr. Speaker, he has had a negative test. I don't know quite why he is not here, but 89% of those who have tests get them within in-person tests, get them the next day, and we are working very fast to turn around all the test requests that we get. And I think most people looking at the record of this country in delivering tests across the nation will see that it actually compares extremely well with any other European country. We've conducted more tests than any other European country, and that is why we are able to deliver tests, as I say, and deliver results in 80% of the cases where we know the contacts. And she says that she asked about care homes, Mr. Speaker. And I can tell the House today we are launching the Winter Care Home Action Plan, and we will do everything. She's right to raise the issue of care homes. We are concerned about infection rates in care homes, but we will do everything we can to ensure that care homes and their workers are protected. And on her final point, Mr. Speaker, I am proud that it is this government that has instituted the national living wage to ensure that every worker in this country, including care home workers, is paid substantially more thanks to the care and the work of the people of this country.
Oh, it's finished. Okay. The whole country, Mr. Speaker, would have seen that the Prime Minister doesn't know how much a care worker earns, because that was my question. The shameful fact is that the average wage in social care is barely more than £8 an hour, and half of our social care workers earn less than the real living wage. Yeah, exactly. On his first day in office, the Prime Minister said, "We will fix the crisis in social care once and for all with a clear plan that we have prepared." Yet still, there's no sign of the plan. And the additional funding to prevent infection is going to run out, Mr. Speaker, at the end of this month. So, will the Prime Minister commit today to give our social care sector the funding that it needs now to get through this looming winter crisis?
Mr. Speaker, she's asking an important point, and we are concerned about the rates of infection in care homes. Clearly, they've come down massively since we instituted the £600 million care home action plan. Tomorrow, we will be announcing a further, as I say, a winter care home action plan, and it won't surprise her to know that we want to see a toughening up of the rules governing the movement of workers from one care home to another. We want to make sure that we protect care homes from further infections, and that is the right thing to do. And I pay tribute to all the care home workers in this country for what they've done to help us bring down the disease. And we will make sure, Mr. Speaker, and as we have done over the last few months, that they get the PPE that they need, that they get the guidance that they need, and they get the cash that they need. And that's what this government is committed to doing.
Angela Rayner.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I do welcome the Prime Minister's comments, but I must say to the Prime Minister, get some skates on it. Those care workers are still not getting the PPE they need. They're still not getting the testing they need. So I urge the Prime Minister to get on top of this problem now, before the winter crisis hits. The Prime Minister has put his faith in Operation Moonshot, but meanwhile, on planet Earth, there was no NHS tests available for several high infection areas, including Tameside and Oldham, in my own constituencies. In July, the government promised that there would be weekly tests in care homes, and they promised this for September. So can the Prime Minister confirm, yes or no, do all care homes in this country have weekly tests?
Well, Mr. Speaker, yes, to the best of my knowledge, care homes in this country should get weekly tests for all staff members and tests every 28 days for those who are in the care homes, the residents in the care homes. And Mr. Speaker, of course, she's right to express the frustration of people across this country about the massive demand there is now for tests, and it has hugely increased. I think everybody can see just in the last few days a colossal spike in the number of people who want tests and who want to ascertain whether they've got coronavirus. And what we're trying to do now is meet that demand at record speed. And just in the last couple of weeks, we've increased the capacity of our testing systems by 10%. We've got 4 new labs that we are building in Newport, in Newcastle, in Charnwood, and in Brant's-Bridge. And we want to get up, just so she knows the scale of the ambition, we want to get up to 500,000 tests per day by the end of October. Now, as I say, that is a huge, huge number, and I really do pay tribute to all those who are delivering it. And I know that the opposition benches like to make these international comparisons. I would just repeat, Mr. Speaker, that we are testing more than any other European country.
No. Well, Mr. Speaker, I heard what the Prime Minister had to say, but I have to say to him yesterday, the Chief Executive of Care England said, we were promised weekly testing for staff. That has not been delivered. Time and time again, he makes promises and then breaks those promises. In June, he told this House, I can undertake now to get all tests turned around in 24 hours by the end of June. They've had 6 months, Mr. Speaker, to get this right, and yet the Prime Minister still can't deliver on his promises. The Health Secretary said yesterday it would take weeks to sort the situation out. Well, Mr. Speaker, we don't have weeks, but the government's latest figures show that there were an average of 62,000 people tested per day, not 500,000. The Prime Minister said that testing capacity is at 300,000, but the average is 62,000 a day. How does the Prime Minister explain this?
Mr. Speaker, we have delivered on, as I say, the most thoroughgoing testing regime anywhere in Europe, and we now have capacity. I think capacity has gone up from 200. The number of tests per day conducted, not capacity, has gone up from 210,000 last week to 240,000 this week. And just to repeat the statistics, we are now, per 1,000 people, Mr. Speaker, this country is testing 2.54, Germany 1.88, Spain 1.91, and France 1.89. In other words, we are delivering exactly what we said we would do. What is happening, Mr. Speaker, is that the British people, quite understandably, are responding to that system with a huge surge in demand. And so it's very important that everybody follows the guidance about when they should be getting a test. The guidance sent out by Public Health England, which has been sent to schools, and from the NHS Test and Trace.
Angela Rayner.
Well, Mr. Speaker, once again, I see that the Prime Minister says it's somebody else's fault. It's the public that are using up the tests. These were the government's own figures and own targets, Mr. Speaker, that they failed on. And the next time a man with COVID symptoms drives from London to Durham, it'll probably be for the nearest COVID test. Now, Mr. Speaker, I want to start to move on to another very serious issue. Alongside the tragic stories we've heard of relatives dying alone in care homes and people not being able to say goodbye to their loved ones, we've also heard from mothers who have had to give birth without the support of their partners or their family. The Health Secretary yesterday said that the new guidance had been issued, but even under that new guidance, many birth partners will not be allowed to join at that moment of until that moment of established labour, leaving women enduring difficult labours, or even worse, traumatic and devastating miscarriages, alone, without support. will the Prime Minister agree to meet with me and my honourable friends and work with us to ensure that no woman is forced to give birth without the support that they need?
Well, Mr. Speaker, she's absolutely right to raise the issue that she does, and I know that members across the House will share her feelings entirely. I totally agree that birth partners should be able to attend the birth. That's why we changed the guidance in the way that we did. But of course, I'm very happy to encourage cooperation between her and my right honourable friends in the Health Department to take the matter forward. But I perfectly understand the point that she makes, and she's entirely right.
Angela Rayner.
I welcome the Prime Minister's comments, and I think that was a yes, Mr. Speaker, but I will follow it up, but thank you for those comments. Mr. Speaker, infections are rising. The testing system is collapsing. When you are the Prime Minister, you can't keep trying to blame other people for your own incompetence. We have the highest death toll in Europe, and we're on course for one of the worst recessions in the developed world. This winter, we are staring down the barrel of a second wave with no plan for the looming crisis. People can't say goodbye to their loved ones, grandparents can't see their grandchildren, and frontline staff can't get the tests that they need. And what was the top priority for the COVID War Cabinet this weekend? Restoring grouse shooting. I suppose, Mr. Speaker, it's good news for people like the Prime Minister's friend who paid for a luxury Christmas getaway to a Caribbean island and funded his leadership campaign and just so happens to own 2 Grousemore estates. So, Prime Minister, is this really your top priority?
Mr. Speaker, while the Labour opposition has been consistently carping from the sidelines throughout this crisis and raising, frankly, I think issues that are tangential, if not scarce stories about what is going on, we are getting on with delivering for the British public. We're not only ramping up, massively ramping up, and Mr. Speaker, she hasn't contested any of my statistics today about the extent to which this country is now testing more than any other European country. She hasn't disputed the massive acceleration in our programme. We are getting on. I'll answer the substance of her question. Thank you very much. We're getting on with delivering on the priorities of the British people, getting us through this COVID crisis, delivering on making our country safer, by the way, bringing forward measures to stop the early release of dangerous sexual and violent offenders, which I hope that she will support, strengthening our union, Mr. Speaker, which in principle the front bench opposite should support, building more homes across this country, more affordable homes across this country, which she should support, in addition to recruiting more doctors, more nurses, and building more hospitals. Mr. Speaker, I don't think anybody is in any doubt that this government is facing some of the most difficult dilemmas that any modern government has had to face. But every day we are helping to solve them thanks to the massive common sense of the British people, who are getting on with delivering our programme, getting on with delivering our fight against coronavirus. And it's with the common sense of the British people that we will succeed, build back better and stronger than ever before.
Anthony Magnol. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is rightly levelling up across the country, giving that issue both barrels. But I know that the South West has often been overlooked. Can the Prime Minister reassure this House and members from across the South West that we will invest in digital and transport infrastructure, we will turbocharge opportunity, and we will provide the growth that they need in the South West? And to that effect, will he meet with a delegation from the South West to discuss the opportunities that are before us?
Mr. Speaker, it's precisely because we believe in his vision that I share of a great southwest that we are allocating considerable sums to the maintenance and improvement of school estates in his constituency. I might single out West Alvington Church of England Academy and Eden Park Primary and Nursery School, which will benefit from just some of this funding. And as for his request, I will happily consult my diary, Mr. Speaker.
We now come to the Leader of the SNP, Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in his previous life as a Daily Telegraph journalist, this Prime Minister wrote, and I quote, "Devolution is causing all the strains that its opponents predicted, and in allowing the Scots to make their own laws while free riding on English taxpayers, it is simply unjust." So let me ask the Prime Minister two specific questions that need two specific answers. Firstly, does he still think that devolution in Scotland is unjust? And secondly, where does he believe full spending and decision-making powers over our NHS, education, infrastructure, economic development, culture and sport should be held? With Scotland's Parliament or with Westminster?
Hear, hear.
Obviously, Mr. Speaker, there is a very considerable, and there has been a massive devolution of powers to Scotland, and the Scottish people had the opportunity to vote for more in 2014, as he will recall, in a once-in-a-generation event, and they chose decisively to reject that, I recall, and I think that he said it was a once-in-a-generation event as well. They now have the opportunity, Mr. Speaker, to vote to support the further devolution of powers in the UK Internal Market Bill. And I hope that he will join us in the lobbies in support of that bill.
Ian Blackford.
My goodness, what nonsense. I never once talked about a once-in-a-generation, and the Prime Minister should withdraw that. As usual, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is all over the place. He doesn't remember what he's written. He doesn't understand his own Brexit deal, and he doesn't even know what's in the Internal Market Bill. I'll tell him. Clause 46 of this bill allows this Tory government to bypass Scotland's Parliament and take decisions on the NHS, on education, on infrastructure, on economic development, culture and sport. Mr. Speaker, a blatant power grab. Hear, hear. We all know that what the Tory backbenchers are saying behind closed doors. The Prime Minister's incompetent. He can't govern, and they want him away before the next election. Mr. Speaker, Scotland's legacy will be in being a fair, decent, law-abiding independent nation-state. Will the Prime Minister's legacy be leading the UK to break international law and break this failing union?
Hear, hear. Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm not quite clear from that question whether he's in favour of the union or not. I take it from his hostility to me, Mr. Speaker, that he wants to support the union. So do I. And the best thing he can do is to support the UK Internal Market Bill, which buttresses, as he knows, a surge of powers transferred to the devolved administrations in more than 70 areas. And I should just remind him that just in the recent coronavirus crisis, 5.4 billion has been transferred spent in Scotland as a result of Barnett consequentials. And I'm proud to say that 70% of the testing that has taken place in Scotland has been supported by the UK government. And I hope, for that reason, if he's a convert to the union, which I take it from his question, then that is just one of the reasons he should back it.
Well, Logan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and please allow me to push back against what has just been said. The Prime Minister has done a stellar job at fending off economic depression right across the United Kingdom, including in Scotland. Now, my worry turns to a psychological depression. Tighter restrictions have forced more businesses to shut in Bolton, and whilst 13,900 jobs were saved through furlough, more needs to be done. When the time is right, can I invite the Prime Minister to pound the streets of Bolton North East, and before then send in the pennies of the Exchequer and more testing kits from Health?
Yes, indeed, Mr. Speaker, we will do that, and I'm delighted to say that Bolton will receive at least 500, in addition to the £40 billion we spent on the coronavirus job retention scheme, £130 billion plan for jobs. Bolton will receive at least 500,000 from the Towns Fund, Mr. Speaker, to spend on your high street, their high street, Mr. Speaker, and community.
Comes to the new leader of the Lib Dems, Shrubwood Davey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Research by the Disabled Children's Partnership shows that 3/4 of families with disabled children had their care support stopped during lockdown. The Coronavirus Act is partly to blame, as it relaxed the duties to assess and meet the needs of disabled people. As a father of a disabled child and the patron of the Disability Law Service, I've seen legal advice that suggests that his government broke international law in how the Coronavirus Act reduced the rights of disabled people. So before this House is asked to renew the Coronavirus Act, will he meet with me to discuss how we protect the rights to care of disabled people and act lawfully?
Mr. Speaker, first can I congratulate him on his securing the leadership of his party, and I must say to him I'm not aware of that particular allegation about the legal effects of the Coronavirus Act, and be only too happy to write him very shortly to clarify the matter.
Nigel Mills.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Residents of Amber Valley were finally relieved yesterday when a proposal for a 1,000-strong festival were withdrawn after it became clear the council didn't necessarily have the power to resist it, even given the ongoing public health crisis. Could the Prime Minister ensure that councils can, while COVID restrictions remain in place, resist such festivals in the interests of public health?
I thank my honourable friend for that important question, because I do believe it illuminates a question that councils are asking themselves, and I wish to affirm very strongly that they do have the power to stop such events in the interests of public health, and they've taken the right decision.
Mr. Carmichael.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week, the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland said that the UK Internal Market Bill would breach our obligations under international law. Yesterday, the Advocate General for Scotland said that the Secretary of State was wrong to say that. Today, the Secretary of State says that the Advocate General was wrong to say that he was wrong. Now, it's of course possible that they are both right in saying that the other is wrong. But surely an important matter such as this requires clarity. And for that reason, will the Prime Minister now undertake to publish the advice he's had from all his law officers so that the House can make an informed decision on the question of legality come Monday?
I thank the right honourable gentleman. I think he asked substantially the same question last week, and as he knows, we don't publish Attorney General's advice. Governments don't normally publish such advice, but what I can certainly say is what I've said to the right honourable gentleman, leader of Scottish Nationalists, that of course this bill is intended to uphold the economic, the political, territorial integrity of the United Kingdom, and I believe it should be supported by every member of this House.
Saxby.
Mr. Speaker, my right honourable friend has always highlighted the importance of gigabit connectivity, and digital infrastructure has been vital in keeping us connected throughout the pandemic. Could he update the House on the government's progress towards the rollout of gigabit broadband across the country, and in particular whether the £5 billion of government funding is being used to connect hard-to-reach areas like those in my North Devon constituency?
Yes, I can, Mr. Speaker, and we're rolling out full fibre. I thank her very much, and we're rolling out full fibre broadband to the North Moor area and investing £10 million in partnership with the local authority, gearing up to invest over £30 million across Devon and Somerset to target 70,000 premises in her constituency that don't have good enough connectivity.
Ian Bell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The figures released this week by the Trussell Trust forecast that we give out 6 emergency food parcels every minute this winter. Will the Prime Minister commit to 2 urgent measures to tackle this humanitarian disaster which is happening in all our communities? Firstly, will he commit to an additional £250 million investment in the local welfare assistance schemes to bring England in line with the rest of the UK, as requested by the Children's Trust and the Trussell Trust? And secondly, will he meet with me and partner organisations as a matter of urgency to discuss bringing the right to food into UK law?
I thank the honourable gentleman. What the government is doing is, of course, supporting local councils to the tune of 3.7 billion for the extra needs occasioned by coronavirus. 380 million gone into supporting food meals for particularly pupils, for young people who need it, and a massive programme of investment, £9 billion investment to lift up universal credit to support the neediest in our society. But I can tell him that my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, will continue to apply the maximum creativity to putting our arms around the British people as we go forward through this crisis.
Mr. Speaker, does my right honourable friend agree that this government's internal market bill will protect our United Kingdom, strengthen our mission to level up and back our negotiators?
Mr. Speaker, I could not have put it better myself.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the week in which the Prime Minister announced the government's new strategy on obesity, the eating disorder charity BEAT experienced a 165% increase in number of people contacting their support services. I am pleased that the Prime Minister is focused on obesity, which is a very serious national health issue, but as the chair of the APPG on eating disorders, I have been contacted by many who suffer from an eating disorders, and they have approached me with concerns with certain aspects of his obesity strategy and the adverse effects it would have on them. Will the Prime Minister take these concerns seriously and commit to arrange a meeting between sufferers of an eating disorder, myself, and the relevant minister in his health team?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, and I'm acutely conscious that there are no glib, easy answers in this area of public policy, and I happily undertake that the relevant minister should meet with the honourable lady as fast as possible to understand her concerns and the concerns of her constituents.
Speaker, regional airports are going to play a crucial role in our recovery from the pandemic and in levelling up our country. But many of them, such as Cornwall Airport Newquay, have been very hard hit, not only because of the lockdown, but also the demise of Flybe. There is a very real concern that if our smaller airports close at this time, they may never open again, which will make the government's levelling up agenda even harder to deliver. So could my right honourable friend please ensure that our regional airports get all the help that they need, whether that be through grants, the government backing more public sector obligation routes, and would he carefully look at reducing air passenger duty, particularly on domestic flights?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I can tell my honourable friend, I thank him for sticking up for Newquay Airport, vital airport, in the way that, which I've used many times, happily in the way that he does. We will continue to consider applications for public service obligations on routes such as into Newquay and elsewhere. And we will certainly look at air passenger duty, though, Mr. Speaker, it would be wrong of me to make any fiscal commitment at this stage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister holds the power to save jobs or sacrifice the livelihoods of my constituents. Currently, 17,700 people living in my constituency of York Central are furloughed. Their future rests in his hand. Next month, 22% of my constituents could lose their jobs and lose their futures unless furlough is extended. Reformed, yes. More flexible, a must. Targeted, absolutely. Extend and review is the only way forward. My question, Mr. Speaker, is will the Prime Minister do this?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think it's very important. I hope the honourable lady is not saying she simply wants to extend the furlough scheme, because I don't believe that is the right way. And I see the front bench shaking their head. I don't think that is sensible. We need to get people off furlough into work, and that is what this government is doing. That's why we've got the £2 billion kickstart fund, in particular to help young people into work. That's why we have the job retention bonus, to encourage employers to take people back on, to continue to employ people. And to answer her point directly, we will continue to apply, as I said just now, the maximum creativity as we have in putting our arms around the workforce of the UK.
Mahendra.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I recently visited the beautiful Mickfield Hall, a wedding venue in Sarrett, run by Anne and Jamie Rankin, to listen to their concerns about the wedding industry. Would the Prime Minister consider changing the number of attendees from a blanket limit of 30 to a fairer system, which allows venues to hold a percentage, say 50%, of their usual licensed activity? This would allow many venues to bounce back and keep on their furloughed staff.
Well, I so understand and appreciate the concerns of his constituents, which I know will have been raised with other members around this House, not just for the weddings business, but for many other businesses which are facing restrictions as a result of the social distancing rules that we've had to bring in. The trouble is, Mr. Speaker, that in all these things there isn't to balance that risk against what we're seeing now in the spread of the virus. And so I must reluctantly say to the honourable member that we will work as fast as possible to get our whole economy open, to take all...
You have had constituents in Cardiff South and Penarth contacting me with serious concerns on testing, and it's clear that the problems originate not in Wales, but with the UK testing and online system, leading to rationing, chaos and confusion, all the while the virus spreads further. Now, we're told, Mr. Speaker, that his chum Cummings has a seeing room. Well, it's clearly not working, because this should have been seen coming months ago, like the exams fiasco. The truth is, he's incompetent. He hasn't got control of this. When is he going to get a grip?
Mr. Speaker, I think that once again the opposition is at risk of undermining the colossal work of NHS Test and Trace. And let me just give him one statistic, Mr. Speaker. Just in the last week, the average distance that people have had to go for a test has come down from 6 or 7 miles to 5 miles. We are continuing to improve this system the whole time. And I would remind the House, of those who want to run it down, that we are conducting more tests than any other European country, testing more people per thousand of population than any other European. Those are the facts. He doesn't like it. All he wants to do, Mr. Speaker, is score party political points.
Shall we? We now come to Deanna Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Every day I receive messages from Bishop Auckland residents about crime and about how they want to see we politicians taking a tougher stance. My own history involves, learning about violent crime in a way I never wished to learn about it, and that's part of the reason I actually stand here today. The first duty of any government is to protect the public it serves, but for too long, our criminal justice system has fallen short of the mark. So will my right honourable friend assure me that the government he leads will take all steps necessary to keep criminals off our streets, to crack down on crime and to keep the public safe?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, and that's why we're not only recruiting another 20,000 police officers, and I think about 5,000 of them have already been recruited. But also, the opposition front bench is making a noise. That's also why we're introducing measures to stop the early release of serious sexual and violent offenders. And I take it from the noises I'm hearing opposite that they approve of that, Mr. Speaker, and they will support us in the lobbies.
We're heading up to Linlithgow to see Martin Day. Martin Day.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given that the 1950s-born women have lost their case in the Court of Appeal yesterday, any restitution for the women affected, 350,000 of whom are in Scotland, needs political action. So what will the Prime Minister now do to honour his own words from last year, to return to this issue with fresh vigour and new eyes and see what he can do to sort it out?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I will have to study the judgment in detail. I'll be happy to write to the honourable member.
In order to allow the safe exit of honourable members participating in this item of business and the safe arrival of those participating in the next, suspending the House for 3 minutes. Order. Are you plugged in? Yes, sir, are you ready to go? Order! I call the Lord Chancellor to make a statement. Lord Chancellor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With permission, I'd like to make a statement on the government's plans to reform the system of sentencing in England and Wales. This morning, I've laid before Parliament a white paper entitled A Smarter Approach to Sentencing, and I wanted to come to this House to outline the measures contained within it. The first duty of any government is to protect its people, but the complex system of sentencing that we have in England and Wales doesn't always command the confidence of the public to do that. At one end of the spectrum of offending, there are serious sexual and violent criminals who, by automatic operation of the law, leave prison halfway through their sentence. We're going to ensure that more of these serious offenders stay in custody for longer. There are also criminals who, serving time for their offence, may become a danger to the public, but who currently would be eligible for automatic release. We're acting to prevent fewer of these offenders leaving prison without being assessed as safe by parole board experts. These measures will keep offenders who pose a risk to the public off our streets for longer and help restore public confidence that robust sentences are executed in a way that better reflects the gravity of the crimes committed. And at the other end of the spectrum, Mr. Speaker, protecting the public from the effects of lower level offending means finding new ways to break cycles of crime, to prevent a revolving door of short custodial sentences that we know offer little rehabilitative value. The criminals in this category often have chaotic lifestyles, and their offending can be driven by substance misuse, poor mental health, or learning difficulties. They often have limited education, very few job prospects, and experience generational patterns of offending. Rather than continuing to send them back and forth to prison, doing the same thing but expecting a different result, we instead want to empower the sentencing system to use more effective community sentencing to get them off drugs and into the jobs that we know can lead them to a better life. And we will do this by better identifying individual needs, providing treatment options where appropriate, and using technology such as sobriety tags to drive compliance. Now, these measures will support offenders to change their lifestyles for good, and in the process to protect the public from the ongoing effects of their crimes. Now, these reforms, Mr. Speaker, won't work unless they are underpinned by a world-class probation system that can understand and implement sentencing properly, backed up by a high-quality probation workforce. And I want to pay tribute to the probation service and everybody who works within it to supervise offenders. We've set ourselves an ambitious target to recruit 1,000 new trainee probation officers this year. And over the next few years, we are determined to invest in the skills, capability and ways of working probation officers will need to do their jobs to the best standard. Within those new probation arrangements, we will unify sentence management under the National Probation Service to further grow confidence between probation and the courts, with whom there is a much closer relationship than under the old model. The 12 new probation regions will have a new dynamic framework, making it easier to deliver rehabilitation services through voluntary and specialist organisations, and we will legislate to give probation practitioners greater flexibility to take action where offenders' rehabilitative needs are not being met or where they pose a risk to the public. Now, these measures will empower probation services to be more effective at every juncture of the criminal justice system. And the White Paper also contains measures to reduce stubbornly high reoffending rates by utilising GPS technology to drive further compliance and to make it easier for offenders to get jobs by reducing the time after which some sentences can be considered spent for the purposes of a criminal records check for non-sensitive roles. And in the youth system, it puts flexibility into the hands of judges to keep violent young offenders in custody for longer, while at the same time allowing courts to pass sentences tailored to the rehabilitative needs of each young person. Mr. Speaker, this White Paper builds on the current sentencing framework to create a system that will be much better equipped to do its job effectively.
And throughout this document, there are contributions from other ministerial colleagues right across Whitehall. That is an acknowledgement of the cross-government approach that will be required if we are going to make a success of these reforms. We've got to come together to fulfil our manifesto commitments, to bring in tougher sentences, to tackle drug-related crime, to treat addictions, to improve employment opportunities for offenders, to review the parole system, and much more. A smarter approach to sentencing will grow confidence in the criminal justice system's ability to deal robustly with the worst offenders and reduce the risk of harm to the public, but also be smart enough to do the things that will really bring down crime in the longer term. I look forward to bringing its various measures through Parliament. Mr. Speaker, I commend the White Paper and this statement to the House.
I call on the Shadow Lord Chancellor, Mr. David Lamb.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the Secretary of State for advance sight of his statement. We need to scrutinise the changes the Secretary of State is announcing today in detail, though I'll start by saying that Labour's priority is always to keep the British public safe. The Secretary of State will remember that it was a Labour government in 2003 which introduced compulsory life sentences and minimum sentences for over 150 offences. It was a Labour government in 2010 which raised the minimum prison sentence for knife killers from 15 to 25 years in the wake of the death of Ben Kinsella. And it was a Labour government which obliged judges to hand down a 30-year minimum sentence for murders involving firearms and explosives. There is no doubt that Ellie Gould's killer got too short a sentence for the horrific crime that he committed. I praise Carol Gould's fortitude and dignity amid such a horrendous loss. Her campaign has commanded cross-party support, and the Labour Party stands with her today. We are a party that welcomes strengthening sentencing when it's necessary to protect the British public. It's in this spirit that Labour accepts that there are some exceptional cases in which a whole life sentence might be deemed appropriate for a young person over the age of 18. The murderer who helped plan the senseless terrorist attack on Manchester Arena is one such case. We do need to carefully scrutinise exactly how the government's proposed changes are written into law, of course, and it's important to remember that even without the changes he's announcing today, no one leaves prison for crimes as serious as these if the parole board aren't satisfied that they are no longer a danger to society. It's also the case that the general presumption in criminal law that when you are younger, there is more opportunity for you to reform, and removing the opportunity parole can also remove incentives for offenders to rehabilitate and behave well in prison. And we will come back to that, I'm sure, when he comes forward with the legislation. I hope the Secretary of State will confirm that these changes, while appropriate for the most extreme cases, will not be applied gratuitously, and it would be wrong to abandon the general presumption in criminal law that when you're younger, there is more opportunity for redemption and to turn your life around. There are other announcements today that we welcome. We welcome the reforming of criminal records disclosure to reduce the time period in which offenders must declare offences to employers, and this is sorely needed. It's something that I called for in my review, and may I pay tribute to the Right Honourable Member for Waverley, who's in his place, who's campaigned on these issues for many years indeed. I also welcome the Secretary of State's new pilots for problem-solving courts. He will recall that problem-solving courts were introduced by a Labour government, cut back by a Conservative government. I'm glad to see them back again, but I wonder why just pilots. Can't we go further? We know they work for people with serious addictions and problems coming back and back into the system. It's also very good to see the Ministry of Justice now hearing our calls. Again, I raised this in the Lammy review for offenders who need greater support because they have neurodivergent conditions such as autism, ADHD and dyslexia. And I'm sure the whole House welcomes that we finally arrived at that place. We welcome the government's announcement that it will recruit more probation officers after its U-turn on Chris Grayling's failed experiment with privatisation that missed targets, cost the taxpayers an extra £460 million. We will continue to hold the government to account as we get back to having a fully national probation service. And Labour also welcomes the government using this white paper as an opportunity to increase the maximum penalty for causing death by dangerous driving, as well as the maximum penalty for causing death by careless driving whilst under the influence of drink and drugs. Sentencing reform is needed, but on its own it's not enough. The Ministry of Justice data shows that between the 9th of June and the 31st of July this year, nearly a third of prisoners, that's 2,400 people, were released homeless or to an unknown circumstance. How will longer sentences protect the public if people continue to be released homeless and without the chance to turn their lives around? The announcement around GPS tagging in the community is welcome, but what steps is the government taking to ensure services exist to support former offenders into work? Why is there still no cross-departmental plan to reduce reoffending and enable the reintegration of prison leavers? Does the Secretary of State plan to publish one within the next 3 months, as recommended by the Public Accounts Committee last week? And does the Secretary of State share the concerns of the Victims Commissioner that recent changes to the CPS guidance could lead to the CPS having the freedom to drop difficult cases, leaving victims feeling cheated if the current system is overstretched? Mr. Speaker, this statement follows in a week in which a Secretary of State who took an oath to uphold the rule of law has let his office and the system down. The whole country have watched him squirm in his seat as he has stood with the Prime Minister. I hope he recognises the importance of the days ahead as he brings this back to the chamber.
Secretary Butland.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It was all going so well, and then the right honourable gentleman had to spoil it with an ill-judged, ill-timed and wholly inappropriate intervention. Can I remind him that as a practitioner for years I had to endure a Labour government that passed with incontinence Criminal Justice Act after Criminal Justice Act that created the chaos that I am now having to deal with in terms of sentencing reform. I will take no lectures, with the greatest respect from him, about a Labour government that made automatic early release at the halfway term for so many sentences the norm. That is the wrong that we are righting now as a result of the reforms that we will introduce. But I'm grateful to him for the way in which he has sensibly engaged with the important issues about rehabilitation of offenders. And I'm particularly pleased that there is a warm welcome for the work that we're going to do on neurodivergent conditions and disorders. That has been a long-standing passion and commitment of mine. Autism, ADHD, they are real conditions that affect thousands of people in our country, and I have had personal experience in the criminal justice system of representing people with those conditions, and I think we can do better. And that's why we are going to take action on that. I can reassure him about the cross-government work that's going on offender employment. I'm grateful to my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions. She's deeply committed to increasing the number of offenders in work. We are working on plans, a cross-government strategy. In fact, the committee is chaired by the Prime Minister, which exemplifies the government's deep and fundamental dedication to this bold agenda. I welcome the other comments that he has made, and it is in that spirit of constructive engagement that I am sure we will work together to make sense of criminal justice after years of failure, mainly by the government of which he was a member.
Chair of the Select Committee, Sir Robert Neal.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Can I very warmly congratulate the Lord Chancellor upon what I think is an excellent and very well balanced statement, and it shows his own experience as a practitioner in these matters. A number of the themes which the White Paper addresses are ones which the Justice Select Committee has picked up on a number of occasions, and I look forward to progress being made upon those. And I particularly welcome the recognition that protection of the public and rehabilitation of those who can be rehabilitated are not mutually exclusive. But will he also perhaps use the opportunity that this White Paper gives us to try and engender a wider debate across our society as a whole about the purpose of sentencing, the purposes of imprisonment and of community sentences, to give both the public and sentencers greater confidence in the suite of measures that's available, and perhaps to create a broader-based, better informed understanding of the complexities of the tasks that people in the justice system grapple with day to day.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very grateful to the Chairman of the Justice Select Committee. We all know his long and deep knowledge of the system as a practitioner. He's right to remind us about the purposes of sentencing. He will see in this white paper a lot of reference to those issues. Public protection, protecting the public from harm, but also protecting the public from crime. And the two go together. The one is served, I would submit, by effective prison sentences. The second is served by rehabilitation, by the community options that can make such a difference with the right support. Thank you.
We now have the SNP spokesperson, John Cherry.
I'd like to thank the Lord Chancellor for his customary courtesy in affording me advance sight of his statement. However, it's a little difficult to stomach rhetoric about how tough this government is on lawbreakers when only a week ago a minister stood at the dispatch box and told us that they intended to break international law, albeit in a limited and specific way. And even the Lord Chancellor himself seems to think that when it comes to his government colleagues, the rule of law can be watered down to allow law-breaking which he finds acceptable. So I want to make it clear, Mr. Speaker, that in Scotland, the law applies equally to everyone, regardless of whether they are a government minister or an ordinary member of the public. And I wonder if the Lord Chancellor agrees that it should be the same in England and Wales. Now, that's where this sentencing white paper applies. Sentencing's devolved to Scotland. However, the position of the SNP is clear. We want to work hard with the UK government and European friends to make sure that all communities in these islands are protected from terrorism and serious crime. And there are elements of this white paper to be welcomed, including the offer of treatment for vulnerable prisoners with mental health and addiction problems, and also the proposals to encourage courts to pass community sentences for less serious offences following the Scottish model. However, Mr. Speaker, I would caution or express caution about giving whole-of-life sentences to teenagers. Expert evidence shows that young people are more likely to be open to rehabilitation. And this is important for the public because every time we manage to rehabilitate or de-radicalise someone, it makes the public a little bit safer. And prisoners who know that they're never going to be released have little incentive not to kill or maim not only other prisoners, but prison officers. And I'd like to know that the Lord Chancellor has taken cognizance of these factors. Mr. Speaker, the Scottish Sentencing Council is consulting on its third draft guideline about sentencing young people, and I wonder whether there are any proposals to consult on this issue in England and Wales as well. Thank you.
I'm grateful to the Honourable and Learned Lady. With regard to the latter matters, of course, the Sentencing Council has done a lot of work on sentencing of young offenders. Any further guidelines on matters for them, but perhaps she and I together can explore that with the chair of that council. I note the point she makes about young offenders, and in fact it echoes what the Right Honourable Gentleman, the Shadow Justice Secretary, said. We absolutely will preserve the principle that the sentencing of young offenders is a separate legal regime from the sentencing of adults. Quite clearly there are differences, and the welfare issue has to be paramount. Having said that, there will be, sadly, some egregious and particularly extreme examples of serious criminality that may merit the imposition of the most serious sentence available to the court. So what I am proposing is that the courts would have a discretion under 21 as opposed to them being mandated to impose such a severe sentence. And I think that element of discretion is really at the heart of what I am trying to achieve here, a flexible, balanced system. When it comes to balance, Mr. Speaker, I can assure her that when it comes to the rule of law, both within Her Majesty's government and indeed in our country as a whole, I, like her, yield to no one in my belief in equality before the law, and I also believe in maintaining a balance, and that is what I am doing every day.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The residents of Blackpool South are fed up with a soft, liberal approach to criminal justice that has failed victims, weakened communities and has seen public confidence in the system eroded decade after decade. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that we now need a new approach to sentencing which puts the public and victims first and which ensures that serious offenders are locked up for longer?
Well, my honourable friend is right. He represents the proud community of Blackpool, where I know that many law-abiding citizens are frankly fed up of the position that they find themselves in, and they want reassurance, they want to have confidence in the system. And I firmly believe that the proposals we are setting out today, following on from our manifesto commitment that allowed us to have the my honourable friend in this House, thanks to the good people of Blackpool South, those commitments will be honoured.
Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Local voluntary sector organisations, including many in Newport West, play a vital role in providing the type of support mentioned by the Lord Chancellor around rehab, drugs and mental health. Despite this, ministers have admitted that involvement of the voluntary sector in probation was lost in the mix when it came to previous provision. A number of small charities have made clear that the new system will be just as bureaucratic and costly as the old one, and so they're opting out. So what action will the Minister take to ensure a strong role for the voluntary sector in Newport West and across the country in delivering his plans?
Well, I thank the Honourable Lady, and of course her constituency is one that I know well. I appeared as a practitioner many times in the Crown Court at Newport, both prosecuting and defending, may I say, and I know the community that she serves. And I would say to her, and indeed to all those smaller organisations, that it is my absolute fervent hope and intention to make sure that they are involved in what we call the dynamic framework. I've made it very clear to my officials that I expect to see the small specialist organisations at the table. She's right to say that previously the tendering process tended to squeeze out the smaller players. That is wrong. From what I'm seeing, I've seen well over 150 small organisations already apply to get involved, and I will, both I and the Minister of State will be taking a very close interest in this matter, and if there are any further concerns, she should not hesitate to write to me.
Heading up to Harrow, Flight Officer Blackman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I warmly welcome my right honourable friend's statement today. He will be well aware that my constituency suffered a spike in extremely violent, aggravated burglaries prior to COVID-19. What my constituents want to know is what steps he will take to ensure that the new sentences he's announcing today are actually made by judges, and that those criminals who perpetrate crimes against the person not only are brought to justice, but also punished and kept in prison so that the sentences meet the crime.
My honourable friend is right to raise the particular issue that I know many of his constituents in Harrow East have faced. Can I assure him that when it comes to dwelling house burglary, which isn't just a crime against property, it's a crime against the person because it robs somebody of their well-being, we are going to change the criteria to make it the case that only in exceptional circumstances would a court disapply the minimum 3-year term that 3 strikes domestic burglars will receive. That will see a greater number of those people serving longer behind bars.
Brian.
There's been a terrible rise over the last 10 years in assaults on emergency workers, ambulance workers being sexually assaulted, punches, spitting, stabs, everything. That's why I introduced my private members legislation a couple of years ago. Unfortunately, magistrates are still saying to police officers, I'm sorry, I just think that a bit of violence is in the way of your work. I hope the Lord Chancellor will say that that is a nonsense. The whole of the prosecuting authorities have to take this far more seriously because so far, still, the sentencing guidelines haven't been changed. Still, the number of cases is rising. So I wholly support the sudden conversion of government ministers who were violently opposed to my bill when I first introduced it and said that they didn't want it to be a 2-year maximum sentence. I welcome their conversion on the road to Damascus, but I want to make sure that this law is actually used because otherwise this will continue.
Well, the Honourable Gentleman for Rhondda is to be applauded for his work on that important legislation. And our commitment to double the maximum term is set out in the White Paper, and that's what he will do. But he's right to talk about the prosecution and practice within the courts and in our magistrates' system. And I don't know about the road to Damascus. I've been on the road to Tonopandi quite a few times in his constituency, and I know what his constituents would say to me. They would expect that prison officers, that police officers, that blue light workers should have that protection. And let's not forget that it's not just about the provisions in that Act, it's about the law of assault generally and the aggravated circumstances that a court can take into account in increasing sentences. But he makes a powerful point.
Desmond Sway.
He keeps his balance, but will he address eye-watering costs like the 456,000 clocked up by Andrew Harper's killers? That can't be right, can it?
Well, my honourable friend knows that everybody in this country is equal before the law, and fair trials have to happen. Legal costs are, of course, paid to the people who represent criminals or accused people. I take his point about making sure that our legal aid system is efficient and that money is not wasted, but the fundamental principles of the right to a fair trial are something that I will defend and that I think that he would agree with as well.
Let us head up to Greater Manchester with Tony Lloyd. Tony Lloyd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And there's much in the Lord Chancellor's statement that I very strongly welcome as a former Police and Crime Commissioner. But can I raise with him an issue that I know he is well aware of? In my constituency of Rochdale, there are many people who were victims of the evil men who sexually abused them. Those women will carry that burden for the rest of their lives. One of the things that is incomprehensible is that once those perpetrators have been released and finished their time before probation, there is nothing to stop them confronting those victims. The victims can walk round the corner and find their attacker in front of them. Now, can the Lord Chancellor give me an assurance as part of the White Paper we can look at how that can be prevented in the future, even if it can't be retrospective?
I'm very grateful to the Honourable Gentleman Member for Rochdale for raising that. Indeed, we have, as he says, met to discuss this matter. It seems to me that there are potentially existing types of order, crime prevention orders, serious crime prevention orders, that could be used, particularly where somebody has completed their term of imprisonment and licence, and therefore the probation services involvement has come to an end. I will welcome further engagement with him because he doesn't just speak for past victims, he speaks for people whose voice has yet to be heard and whose voice must be heard if we are to effectively protect the victims of sexual abuse.
Roland Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, they say an Englishman's home is his castle, and it's certainly a place that all people should feel safe and secure. As a result, when someone burgles a home, they don't just take their possessions, but they violate their safety in their own home. Yeah. Can my right honourable friend assure me that his new sentencing guidelines will ensure that the people who commit these crimes are appropriately punished, appropriately rehabilitated, and that the public are protected from further occurrence?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right to echo the comments I made about burglary being a crime against the person, and she will have heard my observations about strengthening the safeguards of the 3 strikes and you're out burglary minimum term of 3 years, which means that a greater proportion of that type of offender will now serve longer in custody. We're also doing it for 2 strikes knife possession as well, because we want to send a clear message that this type of criminality will not be tolerated.
Mr. Speaker, can I first of all thank the Lord Chancellor for his diligence and his wisdom in this statement. I welcome the news that child killers are to be held longer and that automatic release of violent and dangerous criminals is to end. But will the Lord Chancellor further confirm that there will be intervention measures in place for young men who are drawn into drug deliveries, etc., and need to be kept away from hardened criminals in prisons as a method of giving them space and a fresh start, and also a true rehabilitation purpose.
Well, I welcome the Honourable Gentleman's comments and I'm grateful to him. I think he makes a very interesting point about young offenders. I'm very keen to make sure, Mr Speaker, that people who are sucked in, and they might be quite young and frankly themselves victims, don't end up becoming criminals themselves. And that's why reforms to the remand system on young offenders are so important. That's why alternatives to immediate prosecution for particular victims of, frankly, modern-day slavery or abuse are so important. And we're seeing with the county lines operations, really good work by the police in making that distinction between the child as abused victim and the child as criminal. And we are going to keep on drawing that distinction in a sensible and sensitive way.
Mr Speaker, my friends, the Honourable Member for Bracknell and I are extremely grateful to our Right Honourable friend for picking up our Desecration of War Memorials Bill within this White Paper. Can he confirm to the people of Stoke-on-Trent North, Kidsgrove and Tork that the law will be changed as soon as practically possible to make sure those who insult the memory of our glorious dead can be given sentences that fit their abhorrent crimes?
Mr Speaker, I pay tribute to my honourable friend and indeed my honourable friend, the member for Bracknell, for their campaign to make sure that the law properly reflects the damage that can be caused to the national consciousness, frankly, and the well-being of communities when war graves, when religious graves, when important memorials are desecrated. And in the White Paper, we have committed to taking up his challenge, and we will reform the law in the year ahead.
Heading back to Greater Manchester with Barbara Keeley. Barbara Keeley.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. 13-year-old Jack Warwood was walking on the pavement on his way to play football with friends when he was struck by a vehicle driven by an uninsured driver driving at nearly 3 times the speed limit. The driver, Liam Wilson, fled the scene and Jack died the next day. Liam Wilson was sentenced 2 weeks ago and is likely to serve in prison only 2 years of a 6-year sentence. And Jack's family members in my constituency are devastated at the lack of justice. I'm glad the government is finally acting to ensure longer sentences in these cases, but can the Lord Chancellor tell me when he expects these changes to come into force? And what reassurance can he give Jack's family that the government will look again at the leniency of the sentence in this case?
Well, I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady, and she raises a tragic and appalling case. I think I'd need to know a little more about the offence, the index offence. It may well be that it's a matter that the family can refer to the Attorney General under the unduly lenient sentence scheme if the offence is within the purview of that scheme, and I know she would not hesitate to advise the family of that. On the general point she makes, I think it's important for all of us to remember all the victims of those who cause death by dangerous driving, and I think today of Violet Grace Ewens, whose parents have assiduously campaigned to get a change in the law, even if they can't bring back their beloved daughter and can't turn back the clock retrospectively. Their campaign has achieved a change in the law that I believe will give a higher degree of justice to future families. This law will be changed with legislation that will come during this session, and I can make that commitment now that we will make the necessary change, not just in tribute to Violet Grace, but in tribute to all the families of those who have suffered so much.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Can I thank the Lord Chancellor for this white paper. It reaffirms my belief that this party on this side of the House is the party of law and order. As the Lord Chancellor would be aware, the Ministry of Justice published a report last year that showed that the cost of reoffending was £18.1 billion per year, notwithstanding the emotional and psychological harm for victims of crime. Can the Lord Chancellor reaffirm and give us further detail on how we're focusing on breaking the cycle of reoffending?
My honourable friend is right to mention the importance of that depressing cycle of reoffending. And in the white paper you will see a ready acknowledgement of some of the drivers of that. It'll be drug addiction, it'll be alcohol addiction, it'll be lack of stable accommodation, it will be no work. The three things that I believe are the way to avoid a life of crime are a home, a job, and a friend, and that might be treatment, and that might be probation support. That is what we are committed to in this white paper. That is what this government is going to achieve.
He has already partly answered the question answering to the previous one. Can you just expand? Currently, really, one of the biggest problems is overcrowding in prisons and the failure of rehabilitating enough people. Can you also address how we are dealing with adverse childhood experiences and trauma that people have suffered, which lead exactly to that spiral of crime, and how will his department respond to that?
Well, she makes, the Honourable Lady makes a really interesting point about childhood trauma. And what I want to do in the call for evidence on neurodivergency is actually open up some of these issues in a much more novel way, because I am sure that with proper support and proper intervention, we can actually divert a lot of people away from a life of crime. When they get into the system, I do think it's vital that we expand community sentence treatment requirements. I'm a strong believer in the mental health treatment programme, the NHS, which is scaling up its support for that, is to be thanked. And we will expand the availability of that type of treatment order throughout the jurisdiction so that judges have a real choice when it comes to passing sentences. It doesn't always have to be custody. There can be a constructive way forward, properly tailored around the offender.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I warmly welcome this white paper, and in particular the proposal in it for longer curfew periods alongside GPS tags, and that strikes me as something approaching a smart house arrest system. I wonder if my right honourable friend agrees with me that this could fill a significant gap in current sentencing options, because it would be an excellent way of both punishing criminals by restricting their liberty at the same time as enabling them to be successfully rehabilitated and therefore less likely to reoffend.
My honourable friend is absolutely right, and I pay tribute to him for his long work in the criminal justice system as a member of the Sentencing Council, for example. I warmly welcome his comments. I'm a strong believer that an element of, let's call it house arrest, the use of curfew together with electronic monitoring, alongside various other treatment orders that could be imposed, could be a really intelligent, smart way of providing a tougher, more robust approach to sentencing, which will deprive the offender of liberty, and of course it cause huge change to their life, but frankly that is part of the punishment and also part of the solution if we are really going to move people on from a cycle of crime.
Kim Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Access to justice has declined for our citizens over the decade in which the Tories have been in power, which is particularly the case for my constituency of Liverpool Riverside. What is the government doing to ensure that the current comprehensive spending review places our justice sector on a secure and equal footing for all for the future, and pays particular attention to community law centres? Thank you.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we are, of course, talking about criminal justice here, and I can assure the Honourable Lady that in the work that I've been doing on criminal legal aid, the £51 million increase that I've ordered with regard to the remuneration of advocates, and the work that I'm doing to review further the whole system of criminal legal aid, she would be, I think, impressed by the progress that we are going to make. But on the general point about access to justice, the people of Liverpool, I know, will warmly welcome the measures that we take to remove serious offenders from the streets of that city and other great cities of the Northwest, and to really protect the public in a way that her constituents will warmly applaud.
Mr. Speaker, the government already accepts the principle of sentence escalation. For example, under the coronavirus legislation, those in receipt of COVID-related penalty notices face a doubling of the fine on each repeat offence. So will he extend sentence escalation to other crimes, especially serious and violent crimes, so repeat offenders face a stiffer sentence each time they commit the same offence?
I'm grateful to my honourable friend. He's right, absolutely, to make the point that, as a point of principle, those people who have been grimly accustomed and far too familiar with the criminal justice system in the accumulation of sentences merit stiffer terms of imprisonment or stiffer forms of sentence. The courts, of course, take that and should and must take that into account when assessing the overall sentence to be passed. And when it comes to prolific offenders, it is my view that the tightening up of the minimum term provisions that we are announcing today goes in quite a significant measure away towards the desired outcomes that he and millions of other people seek.
Savile Roberts.
A stalker caught with a murder kit in his car could only be charged with a minor offence because the victim, Dr. Ian Hutchinson, was unaware that he'd been stalked for over 4 years. The offender, Thomas Budley, was sentenced in August, but has already been released. Dr. Hutchinson was not informed. Will he commit to a review of sentencing in stalking cases and to strengthening the rights of victims?
I'm very grateful to the Right Honourable Lady for taking up the baton from her predecessor, Meirionydd Nant Conwy. Dwyfo Meirionydd, forgive me. And she is absolutely right to draw me back to a campaign which I helped champion in order to criminalise stalking and indeed further enhancement and improvement to the law. I will look at that case, if I may, more carefully, and I am sure there is more work that can be done, particularly with regard to awareness and training of police and prosecutors when it comes to the true seriousness, the invidious nature of stalking and what it can lead to. And I'm grateful to her.
Jeremy Wright.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and can I congratulate my right honourable and learned friend on this white paper, which reflects what he's long argued, that an intelligent criminal justice policy requires provision for both punishment and rehabilitation. Can I welcome in particular what is said about sentencing code consolidation, which will not just reduce the number of mistakes made in sentencing, but also help victims to understand the system better. But can I urge him to turn his mind urgently to the practicalities of the interesting proposal that's made to keep offenders in custody for longer if they are radicalised in prison, particularly with a view to giving the parole board the tools they need to make judgments on intelligence material they will not be familiar with dealing with.
Well, my right honourable friend and I toiled in the vineyard when it came to criminal sentencing procedure. We didn't quite write the book, but we certainly read it. I'm grateful to him for his warm support of the excellent work of the Law Commission now being enshrined in law by this government. That's the bedrock of what we're doing. We're going to build on that in an intelligent way. He is absolutely right to talk about the role of the parole board. I've taken a particular interest in making sure that sensitive intelligence material is indeed released to them in the most proper way, and I pay tribute to the former vice chairman of the parole board, Sir John Saunders, who he will know from his days as a Birmingham practitioner, who made those points very cogently. We've acted upon them, but we are going to go further with a root and branch reform, a review rather, of the parole board to make sure that that and other mechanisms are truly working in a way that ensures that they make informed and fully informed decisions when it comes to risk assessment.
Steve McGee.
Well, there is much to commend in this announcement, Mr. Speaker. I noticed the Lord Chancellor earlier referred to the unduly lenient sentences scheme. Can he tell us how many criminals have had their sentences increased since he announced the expansion of that scheme last year?
I'm grateful to the Honourable Gentleman. The figures are released by the Attorney General's office annually. I don't have the most up-to-date figures. I do know that from my own long experience as Solicitor General, the rate of inquiries had increased dramatically to well over 1,000 a year. The rate of successful appeals, I think last year was somewhere in the region of about 80 cases or so, to the best of my recollection. But it shows that the law officers are properly applying the law, taking proper cases to the Court of Appeal and achieving a higher level of justice where, of course, it is absolutely merited. But I'm sure he can follow those questions up to my right honourable friend, the Attorney General.
Mr. Speaker. Can I commend the balanced judgment that the Lord Chancellor has brought to this? My constituents will welcome the tougher sentences for the most serious and violent offenders, but I think they'll also welcome the more innovative sentences that will be judges will be able to mete out to those that have more complex cases. Can I just ask him on that point, how is he going to assess the pilots referred to also by the Shadow Lord Chancellor and judge whether they're successful? Because I think the public might need some persuading that some of these innovative ways of dealing with crime will reduce offending and thereby keep all of our constituents safer at home.
I warmly welcome my right honourable friend's support, and I'm grateful to him as ever. He's right to point to the assessment procedure. He'll be glad, and he will remember from his time in office, my predecessor, my right honourable friend, the member for Surrey Heath, did indeed pursue problem-solving courts when he was Lord Chancellor, we already have a considerable amount of learning from that process. I want to build on that, and frankly, whilst I can't utterly prejudge every jot and tittle of the effect of problem-solving courts, I am pretty clear in my mind about the direction, you like jot and tittle, the direction of travel when it comes to the effectiveness of their more widespread use in our criminal justice system.
Oh, sorry, Clive.
Just 206 prison places built out, 10,000 promised by 2020. Massive overcrowding in our prisons, little time for rehabilitation, prisoners dumped out of prison with no housing to go to, probation service due to a failed privatisation being left to a phone call every fortnight if you're lucky. And that's led to a massive rate of reoffending. That's the legacy of this government. There are many fine words here in this statement by the Lord Chancellor, but where's the resources that's going to turn around that record of failure?
Well, the Honourable Gentleman will be glad to know that we secured, within a month of me taking office, $2.5 billion for the biggest prison building project in years. And I'm keeping a very tight eye and tight rein on the project delivery unit that will be doing that. We have the model in place. The Wellingborough prison model is one that we can replicate, so we don't need to keep on changing the specification and make the same old mistakes about government procurement. The commitment is absolutely clear. The money is there, and indeed last year the department obtained a near 5% increase in its revenue budget, which was the biggest single increase in years. We have just secured one of the biggest single injections into prison maintenance budgets in years. Whilst I do not pretend that I can claim to be as rich as Croesus when it comes to justice budgets, we are definitely in a better place than we were, and I look forward to the spending round negotiations ahead with relish.
Mr. Speaker, I congratulate my right honourable friend on this white paper and the root and branch approach it takes to sentencing, probation and rehabilitation. There is a focus on neurodivergence and mental health. Could my right honourable friend confirm whether his primary objective is to prevent these people from falling into the criminal justice system in the first place, or to help them cope when they do? And if it's the former, how he will work with other agencies to achieve early intervention?
I'm really grateful to my honourable friend who speaks with her own knowledge and experience as a practitioner, and she's absolutely right to ask me that question, because it isn't just about how to make the necessary adjustments within the system once the person with that neurodiverse condition is in it. It is equally, if not more so, about prevention in the first place, and we will only achieve that with the help of the Department for Education, with the help of the Department of Health, and with the help of the Department of Work and Pensions. There is already a cross-governmental disability strategy. I want to build on that with the call for evidence that we are going to undertake, and I look forward to engaging with all the agencies and indeed all the voluntary organisations out there that bring so much expertise to the table when it comes to dealing with these issues, and speech, language and communication disorder as well. I'm going to put that into the mix because I know that that has been a long-standing issue that we need to address too.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our prison system is in crisis. After 10 years of funding cuts and privatisation, many of our prisons are simply not fit for purpose, while overcrowding is leading to dangerous high levels of violence and self-harm. In January, the Howard League for Penal Reform pointed to drastic improvements in the conditions at Liverpool Jail. as what can be achieved when action is taken to reduce overcrowding. But they also highlighted that this was a systemic issue across England and Wales. Does the Lord Chancellor recognise that any discussion about increasing custodial sentences has to be accompanied by a dramatic increase in funding for prisoners so that we can tackle the issue of overcrowding?
He's absolutely right to talk about Her Majesty's Prison in Liverpool. I pay tribute to the Governor and indeed all the prison staff there for the incredible work they've done to help change a position that was challenging to one of real progress. And that's been happening in prisons up and down our country. I make no bones about it. The prison environment is a difficult one, and he's right to highlight the issue of overcrowding. But I'll repeat again to him, the government has already committed £2.5 billion to a new prison building programme. We have secured more funding for prison maintenance, and we have secured £100 million for new prison security, X-ray security, to protect not just prisoners but the staff as well, who run the line and do so much incredible work in the art of jailcraft, which I think is only understood by a few of us truly in this House, but which we should remember when paying tribute to the tireless work of our dedicated prison officers.
Speaker, the Lord Chancellor is to be congratulated for bringing forward this excellent white paper, and the measures contained within it will be widely welcome in my constituency and I believe are long overdue. Does my right honourable and learned friend agree that the additional measures to end automatic early release for serious offenders will protect communities like Telford, where we have experienced the fear and sense of injustice of early release of perpetrators of child sexual exploitation?
I pay tribute to my honourable friend for her tireless campaigning on the issue that has affected her community and the lives of people that she represents. And she's right to remind us of the purpose of this. We are seeking to protect the public. We're seeking to achieve a higher level of confidence that when a prison sentence is passed, yes, there is a period on licence where the individual needs to readjust with the appropriate controls, but there has to be a clear signal that the bulk of their term will be served behind bars. That is what the public expect, that is what will increase confidence in the system, and that is what we are doing.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There are many sensible reforms in this white paper, but all changes have to be consistent with the European Convention on Human Rights. That convention is also a critical pillar of the Good Friday Agreement. So particularly in light of media reports this past weekend, can the Lord Chancellor give a categorical and comprehensive reassurance that the government has no plans to change either its commitment to the European Convention on Human Rights nor the Human Rights Act?
I'm very grateful to him. He knows that in the manifesto the government committed to updating the Human Rights Act. That is entirely... The Honourable Lady laughs. It's entirely right that an act that is now 20 years old is looked at very carefully, and we will do so. But can I absolutely I'm sorry, no Act of Parliament is immune from review or updating, and frankly it is right of us, no, it is entirely consistent and correct to look. I find the faux outrage of the benches opposite extremely discordant with what the public of this country think. And what we are doing, after having secured a large majority, is following through on our manifesto commitment. I make no apology for that. But what I will say to the Honourable Gentleman Member for North Down is that the commitment of this government to membership of the European Convention on... You listen, you might learn something. The Convention of Europe... The European Convention on Human Rights. The commitment of this government to the European Convention on Human Rights is absolute. It was British Conservatives who wrote it. My predecessor, Lord Kilmuir, Sir David Maxwell Fyfe and his team wrote the convention because we were believers and are believers in fundamental human rights and freedoms. We wrote it. We are the party that created the convention. We will stick by that.
In fairness, we just need to take and turn it down a little. You're both one of the most respected and well-mannered members of this House, and I don't want you to spoil that in my company. Aaron Bell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Speaker. Can I congratulate the Lord Chancellor on this white paper? The tougher measures in it are certainly welcomed by me and will be by my constituents in Newcastle-under-Lyme, but it's also a smarter approach to sentencing, which I welcome. But the British people expect the most serious offenders to still face the full face of the law, even if they're under 18. So can he confirm that the white paper recognises this, will not only change the release point for young offenders committing the most serious offences, but would also close the significant gap that exists between sentences for murder for older teenagers, 15, 16, 17-year-olds, and young adults? There's a significant gap at the moment, and that needs to change.
My honourable friend is absolutely right to highlight the difficulty that I'm afraid is caused by having a generic starting point for all young offenders, irrespective of their age or maturity. I think it's far better, Mr. Speaker, to have a sliding scale which allows the courts to, using their discretion, reflect the differing maturities and age ranges of the particular serious offender that is before them. And he is right that whereas the welfare of young people has to be our primary concern, when it comes to the most serious offences, we cannot, I'm afraid, stint from our duty to protect the public and to make sure that the punishment fits the crime.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There are aspects of this white paper that I very much welcome, particularly paragraphs 239 to 242 about acknowledging the role that homelessness plays in reoffending. But being released on a Friday makes it difficult for offenders to access public services, which also leads to an increase in reoffending. So can I ask the Secretary of State what steps he's taken to look at people being released on a Friday?
Honourable Gentleman, again, who speaks with experience as a practitioner, is right to highlight this issue. I have considered whether or not we should just ban release on a Friday. I think, that's, Mr. Speaker, that's probably the wrong answer because, frankly, the services need to be there every day of the week. And there should be no distinction between what happens on a Friday to what happens on a Wednesday, frankly. And that's why the cross-government work, in order to make sure that when that offender has released, there has been proper work done to identify accommodation, to identify a potential job, and to make sure the benefit system is working if no job is available, is absolutely at the heart of what I'm trying to do.
Mr. Speaker, and can I also really welcome this statement and also thank the Lord Chancellor for meeting with me to discuss the tragic case of my constituent Sean Morley, who was killed in a horrific hit-and-run accident. Does he agree with me that, that for those who cause death or injury by dangerous driving, the punishment really must fit the crime? And as Sean's mum said, in the wrong hands, a car is as deadly a weapon as a gun or a knife.
I pay tribute to my honourable friend for his assiduous work on the behalf of his constituents. As Solicitor General, very briefly, Mr. Speaker, I dealt with a number of egregious cases of causing death by dangerous driving where the 14-year maximum just simply wasn't enough to deal with the true justice of the case. I've seen far too many judges struggle with that maximum, and I've seen the Court of Appeal struggle with it as well. Well, we can end that struggle now by allowing a far greater discretion when it comes to these most appalling crimes.
Mr. Speaker, he knows I'll welcome the work that's being done on the neurodivergent people who become in contact with the criminal justice system. And can I encourage him to keep working with Autism in Justice, which was funded by some of my constituents, but also make sure the Home Office is on board with this. On the issue of death by dangerous driving, I should remind the House that it was on October the 17th, 2017, that the now Foreign Secretary made a commitment to me to introduce the change that's now being announced in the White Paper. And I've been chasing him, as he knows, for the last 3 years to get on with it. I'm glad it's in this White Paper, but can we have that legislation as soon as possible? Because grave injustice is still being suffered, including by the parents of Sophie Taylor, my constituent, who was killed in a terrible case.
Well, the honourable gentleman knows that, again, the constituency he serves is very familiar to me, having been part of the criminal justice community in Cardiff for many years. I can give him that assurance on the causing death matters, that they will be introduced in a bill in this session, which means that we can get on with this important job. And then secondly, on neurodivergence, I do pay tribute to his constituents for their tireless work. It is vital that their experience and others like them is not repeated time and time again, and that we actually learn from that, incorporate that into our mechanisms and make that change.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the White Paper, particularly the proposals to extend the minimum term for sexual and violent offenders and the power to end automatic early release.
but will the Secretary of State consider ending the use of standard determinate sentences for rape so that the parole board is always involved before the perpetrator is released into the public?
Well, I pay tribute to to my honourable friend who has taken a long and deep interest in this, both as a Member of Parliament, indeed in her previous work as an advisor. She, like me, took interest in criminal justice issues. Sometimes in the world of politics, criminal justice issues are somewhat unfashionable. They're seen as too hard to deal with, too difficult. Well, we should be doing difficult in this place, and she is right to offer me that challenge. I think what I'd say to her at the moment is that these reforms do offer a higher degree of justice to victims of rape. They can be assured that perpetrators will now serve longer behind bars. I think the question of risk and dangerousness needs to be fully understood and examined, and of course I will undertake to do that with her assistance.
I want to try and get through this and just speed up a little. Stephanie Peake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 2 years ago, my constituent Jackie Wildman was killed by 4 known criminals who stole a HGV lorry. These men had 100 convictions between them. The Lord Chancellor met with myself and Johnny Wood, Jackie's brother, and I'd like to take this opportunity to thank him and to welcome the decision to increase the maximum sentence for death by dangerous driving from 14 years to life imprisonment. And can I take this opportunity also to press the Secretary of State on what progress his department has made on the reintegration of the probation system?
Well, I'm very grateful to the Honourable Lady. I well remember the meeting with Mr Wood. It's left an impression upon me, and the cumulative impression of the meetings I've had with her constituents and others has led to this important announcement. I promise and pledge that we will get on with the legislation. On the issue of probation reform, she can be assured that my officials are working to a deadline of next summer, June of 2021, in order to roll out the regional model with the dynamic framework. In Wales, that work is complete, and already the Unified Service started its operations at the beginning of the year. So despite the COVID challenge, we are getting on with the job, and I am confident that we will have that unified model in place certainly by this time next year and before that.
Jo Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the White Paper, and I'd like to know what the Lord Chancellor will provide an update of what this is going to do for probation services to increase capacity and improve them in Wolverhampton.
Well, I'm extremely grateful to my honourable friend, and again, Wolverhampton's a community and a court I know very well from having sat there in the past, and his constituents will be glad to know that with the changes to probation, the investment that we're making in increased staff, by ramping up the number of probation officers, by improving training, by making the necessary changes, that we will have a system that is better equipped to help turn around end the cycle of offending, and to not just manage offenders. I don't like that word management. I prefer supervision, because that implies much more direct action.
Let's head to Motherwell with Marion Fellows. Marion Fellows.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. During the passage of the Counter-Terrorism and Sentencing Bill, the director of the Prison Reform Trust told the Bill Committee that if we don't seek to rehabilitate young people who are more prone to rehabilitation, public protection is undermined rather than enhanced. This is advice well recognised by other experts in the sentencing field. To what extent does the White Paper take this into account, Lord Chancellor?
Well, I thank the Honourable Lady, and I thank her for her work on that important committee, which of course has United Kingdom application as well as in England and Wales. And I can assure her that in no way do we lose sight of the welfare issue when it comes to young offenders, but at the same time we have to be frank and honest at times where the descent of very serious offending has occurred, and particularly extremist ideation. Then a mixed approach has to be taken, and public protection does have to become foremost in our minds, which is why we are taking the balanced approach that I advocate in the command paper.
Thank you, Speaker. The good in Gould and the Isle of Axholme will welcome his changes when it comes to burglary, as do I, somebody who's been burgled 3 times. But on the important issue, I have nothing worth kifing though, Mr. Speaker. So, but anyway, on the important issue of autism, One of the big problems we have in this country is people gaining access to an assessment and a formal diagnosis of autism. So will he ensure that across the prison service and across the probation service, proper training is put in place to identify this?
Well, I was very sorry to hear about my honourable friend's experiences. I'm glad that he shared with us that he has nothing of value, perhaps nothing left of any value. I'm very sorry. But seriously, as a victim of crime, he's right to point to us the both ends of the spectrum. And when it comes to autism, we have some excellent therapeutic services in places like Her Majesty's Prison YOI Aylesbury, but it seems to me that they are islands of excellence in a sea of otherwise a lack of response. That's what I want the call of evidence to identify. Through that body of information, we can then take the sort of action that both he and I have wanted for so long.
Steve Doherty.
Mr Speaker, the Lord Chancellor will be aware of the serious violence related to drugs in my own constituency and also the number of terrorism offences that have taken place. And so I'll look constructively, like my honourable friend, at these proposals because I want to see tough action on those serious criminals as well. But I have to say, when you then hear the Lord Chancellor on the television this morning talking about fudging the law, and after a week in which he's been defending the specific and limited breaking of the law, can he ever imagine having made such comments when he was a recorder in South Wales or amongst his legal colleagues at Apex Chambers in Cardiff? Because many of them will welcome the sentencing reform, but they certainly don't welcome comments that undermine the rule of law in this country.
Well, that was a question of two halves. I absolutely welcome the points that he makes on behalf of the people of Cardiff South and Penarth. I have to say to him that to make the sort of analogy that he does with a position with regard to an international negotiation and the interpretation of a treaty is to stretch the point too far.
38 withdrawn, so we go down to Wales with Antoniazzi.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Less than 1 in 10 crimes now lead to a suspect being charged. This is the lowest charging rate for reported crimes since records begun. And nearly half of all crimes close with no suspect being identified at all. What steps is the government taking to fix this?
The Honourable Lady quite rightly refers to what is often termed as the justice gap. That is the difference between crimes that are reported and the bringing of these offences to full prosecution. Of course, the sad truth is that not all offences will have the requisite evidence for that threshold to be met, and that's why we have an independent prosecutorial service in this country. But she's right to talk about the need for us to bear down most heavily on investigation. That's why increasing the numbers of police officers, we are already 4,000 up on where we were. We are going to hit that 20,000 target and I believe move beyond it, will really help to turbocharge the investigation and prosecution of offences so that we can, in large measure, help to close that gap.
Final question from Dr. Kieran Mullen.
Mr Speaker. Where an offender commits the premeditated murder of a child, we will legislate to ensure that the expectation is that a whole life order will be given, meaning they will spend the rest of their life in prison. Those words, taken straight from this white paper, will mean finally that it will never undo the hurt and pain for the parents of a murdered child. They will at least be able to get justice. I've spoken before about the case of Elsie Uri, who had to endure the pain of the man who brutally murdered her 3 young children, Paul Ralph 4, Dawn 2 and 9-month-old Samantha, being released from prison last year. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that this and other changes demonstrate to people that this Conservative government understands how British people feel on these issues, and where we can, we will go further to get justice for the victims of serious crime?
Can I pay warm tribute to my honourable friend, the member for Crewe and Nantwich, for championing the cause of that family who suffered unbelievable tragedy and trying to make something positive of it. And I'm profoundly grateful for the support he gives to these measures. I value the conversations that he and I have, and he's a member of the Justice Select Committee, and I am extremely obliged for his warm support.
Point of order, Mr Speaker.
Point of order, Tracy Browning.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. On a point of order, I rise to seek your guidance on a matter that occurred in this House. Yesterday, during Treasury questions, I asked the Chancellor of the Exchequer about the soaring numbers of first-time food bank users and highlighted the correlation between this and the 3 million people who have not received significant financial support during the coronavirus pandemic, and whether any government support was forthcoming to these millions of people. Now, the Chancellor is well aware of this group, who have been commonly known as the excluded. And yet, in his answer, he said that he felt I had become confused and suggested I was asking about self-employed people who earn over £50,000 a year in profit. People in these circumstances make up a small proportion of the excluded group. There are many others, such as the newly self-employed, PAYE freelancers, those who earn less than 50% of their income through freelance work, new starters, many more. Mr. Speaker, I have no doubt that the Chancellor of the Exchequer would not have intentionally dismissed the concerns of millions of people I sought clarity for, because I know the issues of food and financial poverty are of the utmost importance to him, as they are to all members of the House. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, I wonder, what advice can you give me on how I can ensure the Chancellor has the opportunity to put it on record that actually it was he who may have found himself confused during yesterday's question time, and more importantly, answer my question in full for the sake of the millions who are locked out of support?
First of all, can I say to the Honourable Lady, thank you for giving me notice of the point of order. And as she's well aware, it's not a point of order for the Chair. But what we have ensured, and quite rightly you've asked what advice, the advice is simple. You've got it on the record. It's there for everybody to see that it is corrected. And I'm sure that the sound of your voice will be whirling around on its way to remind the Chancellor of what has been said. Sorry. Point of order, West Streeting.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wish to raise a point of order to seek your advice on correcting an injustice. My honourable friend, the member for Nottingham East, was wrongly accused of fabricating a shortage of PPE at the care home in which she used to work as a carer and had returned to work to assist during the pandemic. Unfortunately, as well as being accused of lying in the media and on social media, my honourable friend's account of this serious PPE shortage was called into account by the members for Rutland and Melton, Mansfield, Bedfordshire, Braintree and North West Durham, as well as the noble Lord Baron Goldsmith of Richmond Park. I had notified them, Mr. Speaker, in advance that I would be raising this matter. Today, the care home in question has confirmed to the Daily Mirror that there were shortages of PPE, that my honourable friend had been telling the truth, and that she was asked to record a video appeal for PPE donations, which has been a source of national concern. Can you advise me on how I might bring these facts to the attention of the House and the honourable and right honourable members concerned? Because in the short time she has been a member of this House, my honourable friend, the member for Nottingham East, has shown herself to be a principled, caring and compassionate member of this House, and the government must listen to frontline workers and stop trying to distract from its own catastrophic failure to support care homes and their staff during this crisis.
It's very much on the same lines, but what I would say, I do thank you for giving me notice of the point of order. It is very important that this is placed on the record, and I hope members will reflect on what has been said, and I'm sure, quite rightly, when they read it, they may wish to speak with the honourable member in question, and I'm sure that, and I would say this to all sides, we ought to be a little bit more careful before we want to point the finger at each other. I think, in the end, think before we act, and therefore, with a little bit more care and a little bit more caution, we won't have to hear the point of order. But I would say it's not a point of order for me, but it is certainly on the record, as I said, and I'm sure that other members will reflect. Now, I've not been given notice of this point of order, so Debbie Abrams.
Well, Mr. Speaker, you should have had notice of it, so my apologies if it hasn't reached you. But I seek your guidance. I'm frequently getting tardy and irrelevant responses from government ministers in relation to casework from constituents, and I'm afraid the worst culprits are Department of Health and Social Care, the Treasury and BEIS. In one case, I had to send 2 reminders to the Department of Health and Social Care concerning a constituent who had secondary breast cancer. That's terminal breast cancer. This morning's reply from Treasury was to a constituent regarding his business was 3 months late and had no relevance, was a standard reply. This is incredibly disrespectful to my constituents. So I appreciate everybody is busy, but it is not good enough. So I wonder if, again, your good self could mention how I might remind government ministers that they have an obligation and a duty to respond to constituents' enquiries. Thank you.
I do take this on board, and we're all concerned. And I would say Ministers have a duty of care to reply to members. We are acting on the people that elect us. And what I would say is that I've taken this up once with the leader. Well, I've taken it up on numerous occasions with the leader. He's also been taking it up with the ministers and ministers' offices. And what I would say is I think he might be behind the chair, and I'm sure that he will be listening very carefully, taking notes, and already sending out the message. Ministers should answer in time and fully answer the questions that's been placed to them. It isn't good enough, and I'm sure we'll all agree, I don't care what side of the House it is, they have a duty of care to every member of this House, and they should be put first. So I will take that up on board. Thank you. Now then, in order for the safe exit of honourable members participating in this item of business and the safer arrival of those participating in the next, I am now suspending the House for 3 minutes. Order!
Order! We shall resume with the presentation of a bill. Wendy Chamberlain. Second reading what day?
Friday the 13th of November.
Friday the 13th of November. Thank you. We now come to the 10-minute rule motion. Dawn Butler.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, I beg to move that leave be given to bring in a bill to require the Leader of the House of Commons to move a motion asserting the equal right of all members of this House of Commons to participate in proceedings and establishing mechanisms for MPs unable to attend Westminster to vote remotely and participate remotely in proceedings, including debates and general committees. I stand to present this bill, originally tabled by the MP for Swansea East. My honourable friend would have presented his speech today, but ironically, he is self-isolating. And his right to speak in this chamber remotely has been removed by the government in June. I am pleased to adopt the bill and present our combined speech. This bill is about fundamental constitutional and democratic rights of all voters to be represented by their elected MP in this Parliament. It aims to restore democratic participation for all MPs in debates and committees which shape and decide the laws of our country. Only then will the voices of millions of voters across hundreds of constituencies be heard once again. This is desperately needed at this crucial time of prospects and decisions made that will not just shape our lives, but almost every aspect of the lives of future generations. This country needs our democracy to be fully functioning in order to make the best decisions as we are faced with a resurgence of coronavirus pandemic that has already sadly killed over 45,000 people. An abrupt end to furlough that will throw millions of people into unemployment and poverty, and a no-deal Brexit, which this House previously agreed was a bad idea. At this time, like no other, Madam Deputy Speaker, all voters and all constituents must have their voices heard equally in this place, so that ours, in the mother of all parliaments, can ensure debate, dialogue and scrutiny is paramount to help chart the best possible route through these unprecedented, turbulent times. Madam Deputy Speaker, this was happening in April and May, with MPs from all corners of the United Kingdom successfully participating as equals in debates using video conferencing technology. It is the 21st century. Really, we should be getting with the programme. But in June, the government disenfranchised millions of voters by abolishing online participation in parliamentary debates. The government knew this was an anti-democratic decision done in an anti-democratic manner. It is probably illegal for Parliament to vote to undermine its own legitimate democratic mandate in a vote that excluded those constituencies most affected, as the vote itself wasn't conducted online and shielding MPs were actually excluded. The government has abused the purpose of parliamentary privilege to prevent the courts from protecting the rights of voters to be represented in this place in Parliament. Parliamentary privilege is meant to protect the rights of MPs to represent their voters in Parliament free from fear of threat of court action. But the government has used it for its own protection to prevent the courts intervening and rule that removing the rights of voters to be represented is illegal. Madam Deputy Speaker, how can this be right? How can this be democratic? How can this be parliamentary sovereignty that some profess to hold so dear? And these rights to participate are crucial as the government embarks on a reversal of our devolutionary settlement, breaching the Good Friday Agreement and potentially breaking international law. At home, the government is actually creating a divided kingdom. Abroad, it is destroying trust in Britain and our reputation on an international stage. At such an important time, all our constituencies must have an equal voice in these debates. The taxpayer has already invested heavily in the technology for remote democracy, and we know that it works, and it works really well. It is working in the Welsh Parliament, in the Scottish Parliament, so why not in the Westminster Parliament? It is even being used in the other place next door, in the House of Lords. So the most obvious question is, why isn't remote voting being used in the House of Commons? Why are so many constituents being not being represented and millions of voters are left voiceless. Why is that happening? This bill today resumes the equal right of all constituents to be represented by their MPs by establishing mechanisms for those MPs unable to attend and participate remotely in debates. Just yesterday, it would have allowed the self-isolated leader of the opposition to remotely oppose the internal market bill. Instead, his democratic rights were denied. And last week, and I see that the member is in his place at the moment, the leader of the House, who abolished remote democracy in the guise to go in and getting us back to work, he was unable to do his job because he was self-isolating himself. This will happen more and more as the spread of COVID rises. This attack on our country's democracy, on parliamentary representation, is of crucial and critical importance, as the weakening of our UK democracy is part of a pattern that threatens our fundamental British values. Our parliament is sovereign, and the government's action to stifle parliamentary democracy is worrying and must be considered alongside these things. The proroguing of Parliament overturned by the Supreme Court last year, the brutal handing out of heads of our civil service, the attacks on the public broadcaster, the BBC, giving Ministers Henry VIII powers to make laws without consent of Parliament, the attempt to break international law, trade deals without parliamentary scrutiny, procurement contracts without parliamentary oversight, the creation of a no-deal economic catastrophe, the planned weakening of our judicial and justice system, and the withdrawal from the European Convention of Human Rights. We cannot and we must not allow the minister and his advisers' insatiable lust for power to threaten our fundamental British values of democracy, human rights and the rule of law. Parliamentary accountability is crucial at any time, but more crucial than ever when ministers have taken unprecedented emergency measures that limit our liberties, the way we live our lives and our freedoms. Sir Patrick Vallance, Chief Scientific Advisor to the Government, has said that no inside queues should be taking place as it is not COVID safe. Therefore, the solution is easy. The Speaker, Madam Deputy Speaker, and the House of Commons Commission have developed a world-beating remote voting app, which is something that they and this House and the country should be proud of, celebrate and utilise. This is about taking our democracy back. So I am privileged to move this bill in my name and on behalf of the member for Swansea West to re-establish full democracy in this House of Commons for all of our voters, all of our nations and all of our futures.
I am pausing for a moment lest there be any other speech on this, and clearly there isn't. The question is that the honourable member have leave to bring in the bill. As members of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Who will prepare and bring in the bill?
Madam Deputy Speaker, Geraint Davis, Layla Moran, Liz Saville-Roberts, Dame Margaret Hodge, Ian Byrne, Caroline Lucas, Belle Ribera-Addy, Rosie Duffield, Minera Wilson, Paula Barker, Peter Dowd and myself, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Dawn Butler.
Remote participation in House of Commons proceedings motion bill.
Second reading what day?
Friday the 25th of September.
Friday the 25th of September. Thank you. The clerk will now proceed to read the orders of the day.
United Kingdom Internal Market Bill Committee.
Now. We now move to Committee of the Whole House. Order. Order. Before I ask the clerk to read the title of the bill, I should explain that in these exceptional circumstances, although the chair of the committee would normally sit in the clerk's chair during committee stage, in order to comply with social distancing requirements, I will remain in the Speaker's chair. Although perhaps. Although I and the other occupants of the chair will be carrying out the role not of Deputy Speaker, but of Chairman of the committee, and of course honourable members will be aware that the occupant of the chair during the committee session should be addressed as Chair of the committee rather than as Deputy Speaker.
United Kingdom Internal Market Bill.
We begin with Amendment 33 to Clause 46, with which it will be convenient to consider the amendments and clauses listed on the selection paper. I call Alison Thewlis to move Amendment 33.
Here. Thank you, Chair. I am delighted to move Amendment 33 in my name and that of my honourable colleagues. And before anybody asks the question why would we even bother to amend this bill, which is quite clearly not fit for purpose and absolutely beyond the pale, this amendment is a probing amendment seeking to draw out the Minister on some of the issues within Clause 46 and 47. I would also like to say that I have huge sympathy for the amendments of my colleagues in Plaid Cymru and the SDLP, and with the climate change amendment being proposed by the Honourable Member for Brighton Pavilion, because climate change is something that the Scottish Government has tried very hard to push on and has made much progress on, ahead of where the UK Government is also. Amendments 14 and 15 in the name of the Honourable Member for Doncaster North and his colleagues reflect the issues set out by my colleague from Inverness, Nairn, Badenoch and Strathspey yesterday, that these frameworks exist, but it is the UK Government who wishes to ride roughshod over these mechanisms, to tear them up and to impose their will upon Scotland. And these amendments by the official opposition do nothing to address this truth. And if you were to take them at their word, perhaps you would think that the UK Government are doing Scotland some kind of kindness. Who would object to something called financial assistance, after all? However, we know on these benches what that assistance is apt to look like and the strings that come with it. We already know that they are prepared to lie to the Queen and break international law, so what is this Government's word really worth? The Prime Minister has made clear his intention to stamp a Union flag on projects in Scotland out of some kind of petulant jealousy of how well the EU flag and projects in Scotland is regarded. But there's a fundamental difference to those projects. They were done in collaboration and cooperation with the Scottish Government, and they are projects that would never have happened if it were up to the UK Government. A quick look through the Scotland EU funding programme highlights projects large and small, infrastructure, research, inclusive growth and employability, low carbon initiatives. There is still no plan and still no budget from the UK Government to replace these, and their Shared Prosperity Fund is still, astonishingly, after all these years, yet to be unveiled. In contrast, the EU is a trusted partner with a track record to be proud of. And what we also stand to lose, Madam Chair, is the valuable international aspects of the links this funding can bring, with cross-European collaboration, which stands with the founding principles of the EU and takes Scotland out into that wider world. And in the vein of building bridges rather than walls, I would like to mention a few bridges to illustrate my point. The stunning Queensbury Crossing, toll-free and built by the Scottish Government in response to the corrosion of the Forth Road Bridge, a project mooted in the 1990s, prior to devolution, before being shut down by the UK Government of the time, a Labour government, I should say, and this bridge was delivered by the SNP, not a penny piece from the UK Government towards its construction. The Keswick Bridge, of which my colleague from Inverness, Nairn, Badenoch and Strathspey is rightly proud, built with European funds. Money in the region of £90 million for projects in the Outer Hebrides over the past 25 years, transforming transportation through ferry terminals, bridges and causeways, the bulk of which came from European Union funds. And what bridges does the current Prime Minister have to speak of, Madam Chair? The £53 million he chucked at the Garden Bridge in London, which doesn't even exist. Or the bridge which might also be a euphemism for a tunnel, as described by the Secretary of State for Scotland, that £20 billion bridge over the Second World War munitions dump at Beaufort's Dyke in the Irish Sea. These last two fantasy projects tell us something of what we need to know about the UK Government's approach to infrastructure projects. I will, of course,
I thank my honourable friend for giving way, and she's making a very powerful point about the huge flaws in the propositions of Clause 46 to give the UK government power to spend money on issues that are not the priority in Scotland. And she's right to draw contrast with EU funding. The road I cycled to school in the constituency of my honourable friend from Inverness was built with EU funding. And if it had been up to Thatcher's government, that road would still be a dirt track. And there are examples of that all over Scotland, where the Scottish Parliament and the European Union have worked together in contrast to the attitude of this UK government.
He's absolutely right to make this point, and it's also a point to note that the Major government was known to divert EU funding from projects in Scotland to pet projects trying to shore up marginal seats in England as well, so they have form on this issue. I will give way in some time. I'm going to make some progress, because I know lots of people wish to speak. But it also tells us that the Prime Minister was absolutely wrong when he said that £1 spent in Croydon is of far more value to the country than £1 spent in Strathclyde, because the opposite is true. £1 spent in the south east of England is barely noticeable, but think again of that £90 million investment in the Western Isles, noticed by all, transformational in its impact and of real value to the people who live and work there. Subsidiarity, Madam Chair, EU style. The power to provide financial assistance for economic development, etc., is as wide-ranging as it is dangerous. So much of the power rests entirely with a Minister of the Crown, akin to a kind of benevolent dictator doling out riches. But these are not a minister's riches, Chair. They're the money of the people of these islands, and these choices are not the choices of a Minister of the Crown. They should be the decisions best made by a Parliament some over 300 miles from here, democratically elected by the people of Scotland. And if you'd like to tell me why the Scottish Parliament should be seeing these projects, I would be glad to.
I'm grateful. I mean, the Honourable Lady is giving a very typically bitter speech around the role of the UK government into Scotland. But does she not accept that the UK government and the Scottish government have worked very closely together in terms of the growth deals and the city deals in Scotland? There are very good examples of what can be achieved in Scotland with both governments working together, rather than the attitude that she takes, which is opposing everything that this place does.
Was that 83 million for
Inverness? I'm very interested that he raises growth deals, because every single growth deal in Scotland has been shortchanged by the UK government. The Scottish government has put in more than the UK government to those growth deals, and we are still waiting for the money for some of those growth deals to be realised. I'll take my honourable friend's intervention.
Very grateful for my honourable friend for giving way. Does she agree that it's a disgrace that they're raising this point when in Inverness the UK government spent £83 million less than the Scottish government? When are the UK government going to make up that shortfall?
Well, the UK government appears to have no intention of making up the shortfalls in any of those growth deals. And we look to the growth deal in Aberdeen, which was huge and ambitious in what it was setting out to change and to challenge the economy in Aberdeen and the end of oil and moving towards that just transition. And I can see the honourable member from Aberdeen want to come up in his seat. So if he's got some more money from the UK government from the growth deal, I'd be happy to take his intervention.
Aberdeenshire, but I'll forgive her for that mistake. I was going to take her back to her point about bridges. Would she therefore, talking about investment bridges, join my campaign to get the Scottish Government to release much needed funds to replace Park Bridge, Abington Bridge and Otey Hill Bridge, which is unable to be reopened or replaced because the Scottish Government are starving Scottish local authorities and their ability to maintain vital infrastructure, something we might be able to give money to if this bill gets passed next week.
Well, I would like to find out how much money the UK government would like to put to this, because they've not put any money to anything very much so far. And I'm sure the Scottish government will hear his plea on this issue, and I would hope to hear more about this. Now, of course.
I thank you for giving way. Does that previous intervention not show the risks that's associated with Clause 46, in that it allows Tory MPs to try and lobby for wee pet projects to get funded from Westminster, bypassing the democratic Scottish Parliament elected by the members of elected by obviously the electorate of Scotland? So it's bypassing Scotland, and they're also at liberty to cut Scotland's budget while they're doing it.
5 minutes in. He's absolutely right, because none of this really is in Scotland's hand. The budget postings are still controlled from Westminster, so if he would like more money for those projects, that is perhaps something he would want to speak to his colleague, the Chancellor, on. Absolutely. The budget continues to be cut and put under pressure by the actions of the UK government. So I would like to take this particular clause of the bill in turn and the various points that are made. So part 1 of clause 46 is a Minister of the Crown may, out of money provided by Parliament, provide financial assistance to any person for or in connection with any of the following purposes. And I just want to stop a wee minute there because it says to any person. Chair, I hope very much that this person is not the former Transport Minister, the Minister for Epsom and Ewell, or we may be in deeper bother than we think. After all, just shy of 20 major UK government failings can be traced to him, including handing £14 million to a ferry firm with no ferries. But back to my list. Promoting economic development in the United Kingdom or any area of the United Kingdom. Now, this is a clear responsibility, Chair, to the Scottish Government, in cooperation with local government, our enterprise agencies, business and the third sector. They know best the landscape of Scotland and what would be best for our people and our communities. And we have a quite different idea of economic development than the UK Government's race to the bottom. And who is the UK Government to say, for example, all of a sudden Factory X must drop from the sky, lured in by a sweetheart deal, but without sustainability for the long term? And we've seen too much of this in Scotland in the past. And we see quality, sustainable jobs for our people now and in the future. And it's clear that we cannot trust the Tories to be strategic or impartial when it comes to this either, because they have recent form in their Towns Fund, which funnelled money to Tory marginal seats. And the Chair of the Public Accounts Committee said of this, ministers relied on flimsy, cherry-picked evidence to choose the lucky towns. And to add insult to injury, we've still not gotten in Scotland to the bottom of the Barnett consequentials for the Towns Fund either. B. Providing infrastructure at places in the United Kingdom, including infrastructure in connection with any of the other purposes mentioned in this section. So let's take a quick look at the UK Government's woeful record on infrastructure. HS2, beset by delays, cost increases and a lack of strategic vision. Originally supposed to make it to Scotland, it's not even got to Birmingham yet. Crossrail, late in receiving a further £500 million bailout. So-called smart motorways that put the lives of motorists at risk. In energy, Hinckley has become a byword for UK Government incompetence and profligacy to the detriment of renewables. I will.
And I'm not sure if she's aware, but just today it was announced by Horizon that they're pulling out the Wilfa nuclear power station and Oldbury. So that's actually half the proposed nuclear stations the UK Government's trying to progress is now dead and buried in the water. Isn't it time they actually accept their failure and move back to renewables?
He's absolutely right to say that. And I was about to go on to mention the proposed power station on Anglesey, apparently scrapped because they couldn't get the assurances that they needed from the UK Government. We might also mention that the Scottish Government having to use planning permission to stop the UK Government bringing in fracking in our country, issuing the licences, which we did not want to have. Having to use planning permission to block fracking, something so fundamental to the health and well-being of our country. £186 million spent in 2 carbon capture and storage competitions, and we still have exactly 0 carbon capture and storage facilities, despite David Cameron promising £1 billion to the North East at the IndyRef, and renewable projects which the Scottish Government would love to see promoted further, hampered by a lack of interest and by constantly switching energy ministers. And that's just the physical projects, Madam Chair. UK Government IT projects are notorious for their capacity to waste money and fail to deliver. C. Supporting cultural activities, projects and events that the Minister considers directly or indirectly to benefit the United Kingdom or particular areas of the United Kingdom. And I wonder, Madam Chair, if this will bring us more joys like the Millennium Dome or the Festival of Brexit, still limping on despite coronavirus. £120 million to tell us all how lucky we are to be stuck in this island thumbing our nose to the world. Hold me back. Or is it perhaps a sign of panic as Ewan McGregor has joined the chorus of creatives backing independence? D. Supporting activities, projects and events relating to sport that the Minister considers directly or indirectly benefit the United Kingdom or particular areas of the United Kingdom. The vaguest of the vague, Madam Chair. A Minister again deciding they know what best would benefit particular areas. And I say this from a point where Glasgow has a very strong track record in bidding for, paying for and hosting international sporting events. The best Commonwealth Games ever in 2014, the European Championships in 2018 and the UEFA Euro 20, now 2021, sadly not this year due to COVID. E. Supporting international education and training activities and exchanges. And this one, Madam Chair, I must say, is a real kick in the teeth. The UK Government cannot yet say what will happen with our membership of Erasmus+, a project we don't even need to be members of the EU to participate in. Children from Pollokshields Primary, students at colleges and universities, people in community youth groups have all felt the benefit of Erasmus Plus over the years, and they do not need this all-powerful Minister of State to reinvent the wheel and put a union flag on these activities. They need to have continuing membership of Erasmus Plus confirmed to allow for seamless participation in this horizon-widening programme. And I will give way.
I'm grateful for my honourable friend giving way. She's making an extremely important point about Erasmus. In the Highlands, we've benefited from the University of the Highlands and Islands, UHI, and that's only been able to grow and develop over the years and provide quality education across the Highlands because of Erasmus. This is being whipped away from us.
He's absolutely correct to point this out, and Erasmus is a fantastic programme, and it opens the eyes of young people who would not be otherwise able to participate. And it is very cruel for the UK Government not yet to have given any certainty to that programme. I know there are people that work in international education in Glasgow who are still waiting for answers from this Government to know whether or not their programme will be able to go ahead and whether they will have a job in the future. F, supporting educational and training activities and exchanges within the United Kingdom. And this is a clear area where the UK Government is stepping into devolved areas, because Scottish education is not only protected by the Scotland Act, Madam Chair, but the Act of Union itself, along with the judiciary and the Church. And the UK Government must be clear about what exactly they intend by this particular provision. I was quite taken aback, Madam Chair, by the statement on Monday by the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster stating that there is no risk to water or the NHS. And I believe he might be referring to Section 17 on mutual recognition, to Section 18 and 19 on non-discrimination, and to the related schedules. But the difficulties of this are that these schedules are not set in stone and can be changed further down the line. And Section 2 tells quite a further story to this, because the definition of infrastructure and what that autocratic Minister of the Crown can directly fund on a whim includes water, electricity, gas, telecommunications, sewage or other services, for example the provision of heat, railway facilities including rolling stock, roads or other transport facilities, health, education or cultural or sports facilities, court or prison facilities and housing. Chair, in areas which are devolved, no UK Government Minister of the Crown has any business acquiring, designing, constructing, converting, improving, operating and repairing our infrastructure. Under this, the UK Government could propose to build a court or a prison in Scotland where they have no oversight of a justice system, a school where they have no remit over education, a road where they have no remit over transport, and yes, a water treatment works where we already have the most successful and publicly owned water company in these islands. I'll give away.
I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady for giving way, and she's making an interesting speech about what is the appropriate level of government for making decisions about projects and what projects constitute value for money or not. But at the heart of her argument is a really serious proposition which I think every unionist in this House should find objectionable, and that this elected UK government should never have the ability to spend money in all corners of the United Kingdom for the benefit of its citizens.
It's called devolution. It's called devolution, which this Parliament voted for, which the Scottish Parliament, which the Scottish people and the Welsh people and the Northern Irish people have voted for. It is the settled will of our people, and it is democracy.
I thank the Honourable Lady for giving way, and she knows I don't support independence, so I support the union. But I do agree with her on what she's saying about devolution. We have a devolution settlement. It was voted for by the peoples of Wales and Scotland and Northern Ireland, and we need to respect that. And perhaps that's why, in the last few minutes, the Advocate General for Scotland has resigned, stating that he cannot take this bill further. Former chair of the Scottish Conservatives, and perhaps that reflects that he's not willing to front these arguments any longer either.
I would agree with this point 100%. And I was going to mention the Advocate General later on, because it turns out he is Lord Not So Keen on these government's proposals, and neither are we.
I will. I thank the Honourable Lady for giving way. What the Honourable Gentleman opposite who intervened failed to realise is that what is at heart of this bill is an attack on devolution. It's not about who spends what where. It's about an attack on the Scotland Act, an attack on the will of the Scottish people, an attack on the sovereignty of the Scottish people.
She is correct. This is quite clearly for the Scottish Parliament and the Scottish Government to decide, and it is overreach at a ridiculous level. Either this legislation, Madam Chair, is very poorly drafted, which from the government amendments it would certainly appear to be, or they don't understand devolution, which seems also perfectly clear for the interventions that we had, or they're intent on dismantling 20 years of devolved decision-making on these islands just so they can stick a flag on something. It's pathetic. And then, Chair, we get to clause 47, financial assistance supplementary. Financial assistance under Section 46 may take the form of grants, loans, guarantees or indemnities, may be provided subject to conditions, which may include conditions about repayment with or without interest. C may be provided under a contract. So this nefarious Minister of the Crown not only has the power under the Internal Market Bill to build some infrastructure in our country, which the democratically elected Parliament of Scotland has not voted for, but it also gives them the power to stick Scotland with a bill and charges interest. Gee, thanks guys, what can I say? So generous. Chair, it's the Skye Bridge all over again. The first PFI project in the UK, opened in 1995 and notorious for its tolls. The then Scottish Executive had to buy the bridge back a decade later in order to abolish the tolls, which themselves raised more money than the bridge cost in the first place. Do we really want to return to that level of generous investment in Scotland? Chair, 6 years ago today, I was pounding the streets of Glasgow with hundreds of other activists, knocking doors and delivering leaflets and having animated discussions about what a new country could look like. We were a couple of days out from the 2014 independence referendum, a watershed moment for so many of us in Scotland. And I can't begin to describe the feelings of hope and excitement in the city of Glasgow, where my own constituency voted for Scotland to be an independent country. I could not have imagined that 6 years later I'd be standing here, a member of this Parliament. I could not have imagined that I would have had to fight 3 elections in 5 years. And I could not have imagined that Scotland would have been dragged out of the EU against our will. And in my worst dreams, I couldn't have imagined that I'd be standing here today defending the very fabric of devolution from a full-scale attack. If you want to tell me why he supports this attack, I'll bring him in.
Honourable Lady for giving way. It was more going back to a point on being taken out of the EU against Scotland's will. It is obviously still the position of the SNP to rejoin the European Union, and she speaks quite eloquently and powerfully about this autocratic minister taking decisions over spending and restricting the powers of Scotland's devolved Parliament. So would she, going back, she is aware of the restrictions and the powers of the unelected and autocratic European Commission regarding spending and powers in Scotland, and all the powers that are coming back from Brussels to Edinburgh would then be given straight back with all the restrictions that applied before, and some.
Those powers are not being given stripped back. And it is perfectly clear that if you look at the provisions of this bill, the provisions of this bill say that this creates a means for the UK government to provide funding across a range of largely devolved areas that would sit alongside any funding provided by the devolved administrations. These are, if you read the explanatory notes, it is perfectly clear that this is an attack and an undermining of devolution. It's not just my opinion, it is opinions being shared by legal experts around the world of what is happening here. And he is ignoring the truth of this situation. He must know that this is the case. Even when senior figures in his own party say that this is an attack of devolution and are resigning, he should see that this is the case. He knows that this is true. Clause 46 and 47 of this bill grant sweeping authority to ministers to spend money in areas that are devolved to the Scottish Parliament, the Welsh Assembly and the Northern Irish Assembly, allowing discretionary funding of any activities that UK ministers judge to directly or indirectly benefit the United Kingdom. And there's a big assumption in there, Madam Chair, that what benefits the UK benefits Scotland, but there's precious little evidence to say that this is true. This bill allows ministers of the UK government to bypass the democratically elected devolved parliaments of our country without the consent or the support of the Scottish people. Chair, the people of Scotland aren't daft. They see what's going on. This bill shortchanges and rides roughshod over hard-fought devolution powers. We were promised near federalism, we were promised the strongest devolved legislature in the world. What we've got is Dominic Cummings and co stomping all over the devolution settlement in their great big tackety boots. It is established that we in these benches would not trust this UK government with a bag of old pennies, but it's now become increasingly clear that a majority of Scots agree. The UK government's ultimate failed infrastructure project is the Union itself. It cannot exist without consent. Poll after poll now shows a majority of support for independent Scotland, and who can be surprised when it's fast looking like the only option to preserve the gains of devolution? This tawdry bill disrespects the Scottish Parliament and the people who elect it, and it will only serve to ensure that when we have our chance to vote again, Scotland will be an independent country.
The question is that Amendment 33 be made. John Redwood.
Dame Eleanor, I rise to support clauses 46 and 47 and to disagree with the opposition amendments. I think it's a great pity that the SNP wish to turn every debate in this House into a debate on independence when they lost the referendum. Because as a great Democrat, I've only ever wanted willing volunteers in our union. I was delighted to support a referendum, to leave it to the Scottish people, and I trust their judgment. It's a pity others don't as well. Clauses 46 and 47 take important powers to honour one of the pledges made by the Vote Leave campaign and believed by many voters in that important referendum, that the United Kingdom government should replace the monies for projects and investments that would otherwise have been supplied through the European Union. And I think it illustrates, by taking this power, that there is serious intent and that the government will honour that promise of the referendum campaign, that the United Kingdom will not lose, indeed it will gain, as a result of changes in the arrangements for funding large projects and suitable investments. And I always thought there were three problems with there were three problems with relying on the European Union to fund some of these projects. And the first, the biggest one, was that we had to send far more money to Brussels than we got back. And one of the great advantages of this power is that every penny that taxpayers pay in the United Kingdom for these purposes will come straight back. There won't be a huge levy on top. Does the honourable gentleman wish to give in?
I thank him for giving way. I'm sure he fully understands, taking away semantics about money and all the rest of it. When it comes to structural funds, the EU disperses that to managing authorities. So in Scotland, that would be the Scottish Parliament, gets the money from the EU to administer and carry out the projects. Under Clause 46, it allows the UK government to completely bypass the Scottish government. The EU has not forced one single infrastructure project in either England, Wales or Scotland against the wishes of their sovereign parliaments, but this allows the UK government to bypass the Scottish Parliament, which recognises the sovereign will of the Scottish people. Surely that's the problem with this.
I don't see any problem at all. I cannot for one moment believe that the United Kingdom government would want to force on Scotland a project that Scottish people did not wish. Nor do I recognise this idea of the sovereign Scottish Parliament. It is completely under the power of the European Union until we are properly left. And the honourable gentleman never seems to recognise the ultimate power of the ECJ and of the money awarding procedures which they had to go through to extract some of the United Kingdom money back that we had to send in very large quantities to their union.
I thank the honourable gentleman for giving way. Of course, he's never supported devolution. I think in his own words, he described devolution as appeasement and said that we'd had too much of it. Now, I know he'd love to go back to those days when he was Secretary of State for Wales, treating Wales like a branch office. Isn't that really the truth here, is that he's never supported devolution, he doesn't support it now, and he wants to ride roughshod over it?
No, most certainly that is not the point, and that is not my position. I am a Democrat, and I have accepted completely the results of the referendums on devolution. It's quite true that I and my party was on the other side of the referendum about devolution, and I did think it was going to lead to a big insurgence in unsuccessful Scottish nationalism, which is exactly what it did, and I don't think that has enriched our public life any. But I am a Democrat, and I fully accept the devolution settlement, and I am very happy for the devolved authorities and parliaments to exercise their powers. And I also believe, and I urge my friends on the front bench, that we should cooperate fully with them. And of course, it's as much in our interest as it is in the interest of the Scottish Parliament to define what projects Scotland most wants and are most necessary to promote their prosperity. I give way to the honourable lady.
The honourable gentleman for giving way. He said he's a Democrat. Well, I would like to ask him, in view of that, Madam Chair, that the Sewell Convention says that this Parliament would not normally legislate on areas of matters that are devolved to the Scottish Parliament. And I also know that what is not reserved is automatically devolved. So does he think it's appropriate to override the Sewell Convention and threaten the powers of the Scottish Parliament, the sovereignty of the Scottish Parliament, without the consent of the Scottish Parliament, which is sovereign?
I don't accept that it does do any of those things, and I think we are legislating in a perfectly legal and sensible manner. And I go back to the remarks I wish to make as to why it is better that we pay for our own projects rather than doing it with the big discounts on our money through the European Union. Because the second reason is that some of the European schemes required it to be a marginal project. Part of the terms of giving the money was that it was a project you wouldn't have financed for yourself, or it wasn't a core project that was most essential. I don't think that makes a lot of sense. I think once it's under United Kingdom control, we will obviously jointly wish to finance the best projects. And of course, that will be in full consultation with the devolved governments around the country. And the third reason that I think we will do better without the European Union intrusion is the flagging of these projects. I think there's been deep resentment in the United Kingdom that whenever a small amount of money comes from Europe into a project, it has to show the EU flag, but we weren't allowed to put a British flag on to say that actually all the so-called EU money had actually come from United Kingdom taxpayers. Even worse, we weren't even allowed to put a British flag on for the often larger proportion of the funding of that scheme that came directly from the United Kingdom government. So I think it would be much better if we do not have to false flag a number of projects in the interest of misleading people about who is actually paying for something. But in this debate on the bill generally, I know the opposition is still very exercised, thinking that these and other powers are in some way illegal because they in some way violate the rules of international law set out in the EU withdrawal agreement. And state aids is part of this argument, and these are the two central clauses on state aids. And I would like to say that I do disagree very strongly with my right honourable friend, the Northern Ireland Secretary. I do not think there is any way in which this legislation violates international law, and it very clearly asserts and upholds United Kingdom law, most notably the sovereignty clause in the EU Withdrawal Act itself. But the EU Withdrawal Act was a compromise agreement, and it was a halfway house. It was attached to a political agreement to complete a proper negotiation in due course over our future relationship. So it was always rather problematic. And because it was like that, it was ambiguous and contradictory. And so there are perfectly strong clauses in the EU Withdrawal Agreement and the EU Withdrawal Act stating that it is a duty that the single market and customs union of the whole United Kingdom, which expressly includes Northern Ireland, is upheld. And I think that's exactly what this legislation is seeking to do. Now, of course, the government and many others hope that there will be a last-minute agreement, because it is quite easy to deal with all the outstanding legal issues in a comprehensive agreement. I'm a bit sceptical that's going to happen, because I see no evidence of good faith in the negotiations by the European Union, and I think there would be a second legal argument were there to be a breakdown that there hadn't been good faith, which is another reason why I don't think there's any sense in which we are seeking to break an international agreement, let alone the law. So I'm very pleased that the government is taking crystal clear powers to provide state aids and investment in projects, and I hope the government will also ere long issue a very strong statement of the United Kingdom state aids policy, which should cover this and other matters, because I do think we owe it to the international community to have a strong and clear and independent state aids policy which is perfectly compliant with the World Trade Organization's rules on this matter, because we wish to be a global trader with more free trade agreements outside the European Union space. And in that respect, we can probably do better than the European Union, because of course there have been a number of important cases where the European Union has been found in violation of state aid rules by the World Trade Organization, and maybe an independent Britain can do a bit better. I give way.
The honourable member giving way. Is he aware of the comments emerging from Speaker Pelosi and others in the United States that are stressing if there's any breach of the protocol in the withdrawal agreement and threat to the Good Friday Agreement, there will be no prospect of a trade deal with the United States? Isn't this the fundamental flaw in the analysis of those pursuing a hard Brexit?
Exactly. David, I'm not pursuing a hard Brexit. I'm pursuing the independence of our country, which was voted on all too many years ago, and this Parliament, in a previous guise, deliberately blocked and delayed and diluted. And I'm very proud to belong to a Parliament that now is clearly charged yet again by the electorate of the United Kingdom to get on with it and deliver Brexit. And the honourable gentleman should recognise that Mrs. Pelosi is not the President of the United States of America. It is the President who leads the negotiating teams for trade deals. And as I understand it, President Trump and his International Trade Department are very keen and are still negotiating with the United Kingdom on a trade agreement. And I suspect that the Democrats in the House, who will have their own political reasons for what they're doing at the moment, haven't quite understood just how important this piece of legislation is for the future of the United Kingdom's single market and customs union. Because who would want to do a trade deal with the United Kingdom if we didn't have this legislation and couldn't guarantee that we were pledging the whole of our market in the market opening that such a free trade agreement was requiring? And so this piece of legislation is fundamental to any success in negotiations which we seem to be having with Japan, the United States, and maybe the TIP in due course, and so forth. So in conclusion, Dame Eleanor, this is a vital piece of legislation to implement the independence of our country in a true Brexit. It is an entirely legal piece of legislation which reflects important statements in the withdrawal agreement and above all reflects the sovereignty clause in the EU Withdrawal Act, which some of us supported and put in with this express purpose in mind, that if there was no good faith from the EU, we would need to make unilateral arrangements for our future trading. And this piece of legislation is crucial for a country that wishes to have much more positive trade relations than the EU have had with a wide range of big countries outside the European Union space. So I look forward to this state aid regime and investment regime being used in the interests of the whole country, with the United Kingdom being able to spend more of its own money on its own priorities, with good guidance and advice from Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland as we go along, but not forgetting the importance of England and the need for us to have good English projects as well. And I hope it will be twinned with an exemplar state aid policy for world trade purposes, which may indeed be different from the European Union one.
Ben Lake.
Madam Chair, and it's a pleasure to follow the Right Honourable Member for Wokingham and in particular my honourable friend from Glasgow Central, whose assessment of the bill's deficiencies was, I think, exemplary and with which I very much agree. Madam Chair, I'm conscious that a great many members wish to contribute to this afternoon's debate, and so I will keep my remarks quite brief and confine them to part 46 of the bill, which extends the powers of UK ministers to act in policy areas that have been devolved to Wales. Now, in recent days, it has been argued that it is necessary to add to the powers of UK ministers in this way because devolution has allegedly hindered their ability to support Welsh businesses and communities. Now, there is no dispute that there are policy areas in Wales in which the UK government and ministers cannot act. But the suggestion that UK ministers have been prevented from supporting Welsh businesses and communities by the devolution settlement is a laughable excuse for the UK government's lacklustre record of investment in Wales. I should not have to remind this House that the UK ministers still enjoy significant powers over key policy areas despite devolution, and are able to initiate large infrastructure projects in Wales that could boost its economy. Now, if members opt to doubt this fact, I should point them to the party's manifesto since 2010, which have all reflected the reality that in key areas of infrastructure and economic investment, the UK government already has significant powers to support Welsh businesses and communities. Now, we know that this government is keen on investing in rail infrastructure, HS2, Crossrail, and it also has the responsibility over the railways in Wales. Now, Wales was promised quite boldly in 2010 that a Conservative government would electrify the Great Western Main Line to Swansea, and in 2015 that the Valleys lines and the North Wales Main Line would also be electrified. Now, despite these lofty promises, the North Wales Main Line and the Valleys lines are still not electrified, and after 10 years, the promise to electrify the line all the way to Swansea has materialised as a partial electrification to Cardiff Central only. In this key area of infrastructure, there are no limitations upon the power of UK ministers to invest in Wales, and yet although Wales has around 11% of the railway track, in recent years it has only received 1.5% of the money that UK ministers have spent on rail improvements. Why, therefore, should UK ministers be afforded additional powers to act in devolved competencies when they have failed to make the most of the powers they already have? Members might also remember the exciting promise to build the tidal lagoon project in Swansea in a moment, I shall, and the commitment to the Wylfa Newydd power plant on Ynys Môn. Now, regardless of the merits or otherwise of these projects, They were projects that the UK ministers could initiate, unhindered by the supposed shackles of the devolution settlement, but they have amounted to yet more unfulfilled promises. I give way to the right honourable member.
I'm grateful to the honourable member for Ceredigion for giving way, and I'm pleased that he followed the debate surrounding electrification of the valleys and the Vale of Glamorgan line, where a settlement had come to between the Department for Transport, the Wales Office and the Welsh Government, where an additional sum of money over and above the Barnet Block grant was awarded or presented to the Welsh Government in order to deliver that purpose. There has been no progress, so I think the honourable member's argument makes the point, which is very helpful to the clauses in place.
I'm afraid and perhaps unsurprisingly to the right honourable gentleman, I disagree with him. At the end of the day, these are competencies and responsibilities of the UK Government and the Department for Transport, and they have not fulfilled them. We might also think of the powers that UK ministers have over Welsh agricultural exports and question whether they are being exercised effectively. DEFRA recently failed to submit an application to the World Organisation for Animal Health that for Welsh beef, and English beef I should add, to be listed as at negligible risk of BSE, meaning that this status will now not be possible for our exports before May 2022 at the earliest, along with all the benefits that this status would bring. So to conclude, Madam Chair, in opposing Clause 46, I simply say to UK ministers who bemoan devolution and Wales's Parliament, stop scrambling for pitiful excuses for your own failures. Take your responsibilities to Wales seriously and start using the powers that you already have.
Absolutely. Colm Eastwood.
Thank you, Dame Eleanor. I rise to speak to Amendment 19 in the name of myself and my friends from South Belfast and North Down. Before I get into the meat of it, can I just pick up on something the member for Wokingham addressed? I think he's confused about how the American political system works. As much as he'd like to be, Donald Trump is not a dictator. He doesn't get to make all the decisions. If there's going to be a proposed trade deal between the US and the UK, Congress will have to approve any proposed trade deal. And I can tell you, as I told this House the other day, we have lots of very, very good friends on Capitol Hill. I've been speaking to them this week, and the rage that they have over what this British government is proposing to do to this protocol, to this withdrawal agreement, is I am actually shocked at how angry they are. They will not have any violence done to the Good Friday Agreement or this protocol.
And he's making an absolutely crucial point, and of course it's not just Speaker Pelosi making these points, it's legislators from both sides in the US Congress, from a Republican and Democratic side, who are making clear what will happen.
It's absolutely right. The consensus across the House in Congress is behind the Good Friday Agreement. They have been our friends for many a decade. They have supported us through all the difficult times, and they are supporting us today. And they're saying there will not be a trade deal between the United States and this country if you do any damage to the protocol of the Good Friday Agreement. That is what they've said. I think people should listen.
Would he give way? And I thank him for giving way. And I must say, I am absolutely amazed at the comments which he has made. Because, of course, he will know that our biggest trading partner outside GB is the United States of America. So any trade deal with America is bound to have a beneficial impact on the people of Northern Ireland and the economy of Northern Ireland. Is he telling me and this House that his party will actively campaign against a trade deal with America which would benefit his constituents, my constituents and the Northern Ireland economy?
We want the trade deal. We want to be able to trade right around the world, but the warning is clear. If you mess about with the Good Friday Agreement and all of our political progress, there will be no trade deal. So those people who proposed and campaigned for Brexit, who are now not understanding that you can't square all of these circles, need to wake up. There won't be a trade deal if you continue on this track that you're on. There's still time. There's still time to go backwards and realise that our peace process, our political progress, having no border in Ireland, is paramount and will not be messed with and will not be accepted by anybody at the height of political power in the United States. This bill, Dame Eleanor, is an affront to international law, as I think has been said many times this week. It rips up an agreement that was made between this government
and the European Commission. It threatens a hard border in Ireland. And when we look at clauses 46 and 47, it totally rides a coach and horses through the devolutionary settlements for Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. If that was done on its own, there would be an outcry. Our amendment, Amendment 19, is there to give the much used word consent to those legislative assemblies and parliaments. No Whitehall minister should be allowed to override, deny, undermine the interests and the opinions of elected representatives in Scotland, Wales or Northern Ireland. If people agree with that, they should support us in Amendment 19. Where I come from, we value democracy because people had to actually march for democracy where I come from. In 1968, my own grandfather and hundreds of other people were beaten off the streets by a corrupt and unjust police force, sent there by a corrupt, sectarian and unjust government. The civil rights movement got rid of that government, but it took 30 years of democratic struggle against the men of violence, against the state, against intransigence, sectarianism and division to bring about an end to that, to make sure that our own people could be represented by local politicians making local decisions on their behalf. That was not easy. It was very difficult. They created a delicate agreement called the Good Friday Agreement, and the Good Friday Agreement has been bandied about this House and the airwaves over the last couple of weeks. I can tell you it is fragile, it is delicate, and even the people who disagree with me from Northern Ireland in this House will be able to agree with me on this point. We are in a very delicate and fragile place. Please do not mess with it. Please do not ride a coach and horses through it, because there is no way, in my view, that we can hand power to Whitehall ministers to make decisions over the heads of locally elected people in Northern Ireland and not upset that delicate, painstakingly negotiated balance. Nationalists, Unionists and others are working together in their common interest. Is it difficult? It's very difficult. Is it delicate? Yes, it absolutely is. Is it fragile? Well, we've had 3 years of no government. Should tell us all about the fragility of those institutions. We are not prepared to wreck or hinder that progress.
Way, and I'm amazed at his defence of the devolved. Yes, I'm amazed at everything he's saying. First of all, he's quite happy not to have a trade deal with America, which will damage the economy of Northern Ireland. And now he's defending the decisions or the Assembly in Northern Ireland to make decisions about the economy of Northern Ireland, when this withdrawal agreement leaves the powers for 60% of the laws in Northern Ireland in the hands of Brussels, and the bill today seeks to at least free us from Brussels being able to dictate what support we can give to our industry.
Well, this withdrawal agreement took a long time to negotiate. Of course, signed up to by this British government and this Prime Minister. A fantastic deal, I think it was called. What was it for? It was to protect us from a hard border in Ireland. We spent 30 years trying to get rid of hard borders, trying to get rid of division, trying to bring people together and trying to allow local people to work together to make decisions on behalf of local communities. I can't understand how anybody who's supposed to be a devolutionist, whose party is in government, even though sometimes he's at odds with the leadership of that party, how anybody from that perspective would want any minister based in Whitehall to make decisions over the heads of either the DUP, Sinn Féin, the SDLP, the Alliance Party or the Ulster Unionist Party. This bill would allow potentially a Whitehall minister to override the wishes and very strong views of people in Northern Ireland on issues like fracking, on issues like water charges. Who wants to see that happening in our devolved areas? But more than any policy risk, this bill creates even more instability in our system. We cannot afford it. Just look at what happened over the last number of years. So alongside the attack on the protocol, risking a hard border in Ireland, this bill rides a coach and horses through the Good Friday Agreement in so many different ways. If this government, as they profess to do, supports the Good Friday Agreement, supports devolution, wants local people working together, spilling their sweat and not their blood, bringing about a progress and economic progress, changing how society works, working together, will take away the risk of this bill, because clauses 46 and 47 would override, undercut and undermine all of that progress.
Sir John Hayes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. At the heart of the purpose of politics is a marriage between the common good and the national interest, and trade is the heart of both, and this bill, and in particular clauses 46 and 47, make that principle real. Yet the movers of these amendments seem either unaware or unwilling to accept that trade is a national policy. It has to be determined in the interest of the whole of the kingdom. Of course, as the Honourable Lady said, cooperation and collaboration is necessary with the constituent parts of that kingdom, but in the end, trade deals are negotiated by the government as a whole. And the idea that's vested in the amendments before us in this group, notably Amendment 33, that ministers should only act with the permission of those in those constituent parts, is preposterous, as anyone who served as a minister on either side of this House knows. Of course, collaboration requires a relationship between those in the devolved assemblies and ministers here, but that relationship is one in which the devolved minister knows the buck starts and stops, ends with the national government. I give way to the honourable gentleman.
I'm not sure if he's read clause 46 right or the amendment correctly, but clause 46 is about a minister of the Crown may provide financial assistance to the in matters of devolved interest. So it's not about trade, it's about the UK government being able to take decisions on behalf of the devolved nations on matters that are otherwise devolved. So why is it so objectionable to actually seek consent of the devolved administrations for matters that should be devolved anyway?
The problem at the heart of the honourable gentleman's proposition, and it was reflected in the opening speech by his honourable friend, is that the Scottish National Party, the Scottish separatists, believe that the relationship between the United Government Kingdom and the people of Scotland should only be devised and delivered through the prism of them and their friends. But the truth of the matter is, the United Kingdom government has a relationship with Scotland, irrespective of the SNP and their friends. Now, that may be a... No, I won't give away again, because... What I say to the honourable gentleman, I'm conscious of the strictures of you, Madam Chairman, that we should not stray into the realms of loquaciousness, and I know that many others on both sides of the chamber want to contribute. So I'm not going to give way perpetually to the honourable gentleman, who I've shared many arguments with, and indeed many agreements over a considerable period of time, but I suspect we're not going to agree about this. So whilst it's true, well, I'm not going to give way, and I've made that clear. Whilst it's true that the vast majority of the people of Scotland, Wales, England and Northern Ireland may not be gripped every working moment by the minutiae of British politics, millions of patriotic Britons across all parts of our kingdom, in England, Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland, small business owners, farmers, fishermen, employers, workers, everyone from trade unionists to tree surgeons, expect this government to get Brexit done and expect them to strike trade deals in the national interest for the common good. It's as straightforward as that. And anything which provides an impediment to that desire is not only unacceptable, it directly contradicts the will of the people. And this sovereign parliament mission, its duty, is to embody the will of the people, to respect it and to deliver on it. And I'm afraid to say that the amendments before us today would indeed impede that process, whether that's their intent or not. And I'll be generous and make clear that I'm not alleging it's their intent, but it's certainly their effect. Perhaps saddest of all, however, is the amendment in the name in this group of the official opposition. Because the official, I see the honourable gentleman, an old friend of the Dispatch, looking as sorrowful as I am when I have to make that charge, because the official opposition is a unionist party. And yet it's clear from the amendment that stands in their name, they've gone along with the idea that ministers of the Crown should be required to seek and gain the consent of devolved ministers for proceeding with what they believe is in the national interest. Now, I am disappointed about that, I have to say, and it's another reason why we should vote against the amendments in the entire group and support the bill unamended. The shared interest of the people of Britain, the common good, as I described it, has been endangered. Indeed, it has been diluted year after year through our relationship with the European Union, as my right honourable friend set out in his excellent earlier speech. And taking back control is in the people's interest, because it will allow us to develop policies which are pertinent to that interest in every part of the United Kingdom. And I do think that the debate we're having about this bill is to some degree rather recherché. It reminds me of the debates we've had here over recent times between those who wanted to honour the people's will expressed in the referendum and those who were unreconstructed Remainers. Now, many that campaigned to stay in the European Union have accepted the result, have gone along with it because they believe that it was a once and for all decision that should indeed be honoured. But there are those, and we've seen them persistently in recent times, who didn't accept it. Perhaps tied to their kind of bourgeois, liberal, doubt-filled, guilt-ridden perspective on world affairs. They were unwilling to recognise that that is a world apart from the view of working-class Britons, as the referendum showed and the general election showed, and is in large part an explanation for why my party seized power in constituencies across this country, particularly in the Midlands and North, that are never represented before. Because those people in those places had woken up to the fact that that elite had no understanding and no care for their sentiments nor for their interests. Couldn't really grasp why they believed that it was right that our trade policies and our policies on migration and other policies should be determined by this sovereign parliament speaking for those very people. Well, I will give way one more time, and because I've given way to a Scottish separatist already, I will give way to the honourable gentleman as a matter of courtesy.
Very grateful for the member for giving way. Can I just ask him a simple question? How many seats did his party win in Northern Ireland?
Sorry, I didn't catch what the honourable gentleman said, if you forgive me.
I note you spoke a lot about the last election, how many seats the Conservative Party won. Can I just ask the member how many seats the Conservative Party won in Northern Ireland?
The Northern Irish political dynamic is a subject which I'm not going to stray into, Madam Chairman, because you would not permit me to do so. You would not.
Just for clarification, the right honourable gentleman is correct. I will not permit it. This is committee stage of the bill. It's not a general debate, and we will stick to the point, which the right honourable gentleman was doing admirably. Sir John Hayes.
I'm very grateful. Any time, Madam Deputy Speaker, I beg your pardon, Madam Chairman, the honourable gentleman wants to debate Northern Irish psephology with me over a glass of Irish whiskey, I'd be happy to do so. So the essence of the debate this evening, this afternoon, I'm anticipating a long debate, as you can tell, The essence of the debate this afternoon is really not about whether the devolution settlement is as the SNP would want it to be, or as it actually is, which is a productive relationship, I think, between those in the Scottish Parliament and those Scottish ministers and the United Kingdom government. Certainly that was how it was when I was a minister. I had a very positive relationship with my friends in Scotland and Wales and throughout our kingdom. It isn't really about that. It's about whether you believe that the government's hands should be tied in the negotiations as they go forward and try to strike the best possible deal with the European Union. And no responsible member of this Parliament should surely want to dilute the strength of our position in those negotiations with what is inevitably a challenging process with a very wily European Union. I mean, whatever you think about the faults and frailties of the EU, and I could speak at great length about them, no one would deny they are experienced and determined and wily in their attempts to defend the EU's interests. And we must be as united and strong as we can be in backing those who are fighting for Britain, as our Prime Minister has and will continue to do. So in drawing my remarks to a conclusion, Madam Chairman, as I know you'll be pleased I'm about to, although disappointed simultaneously, let me say this. It is absolutely true that engaging both trade policy and infrastructural investment, that we need to be mindful of the particularities of the needs and wants of people across the kingdom. And of course, different circumstances prevail in different parts of the UK. Good governments, good ministers have always done so. But in the end, it is for the national government, it is for the Queen's ministers to make decisions on these matters. And however much that may trouble those who have moved the bulk of these amendments, I have to tell you, it's how it is and how it's going to be. We will back Britain, we will back Boris, and we will get the best possible deal.
Alex Sobel.
Thank you, Chair. I stand here after 3 of the most bizarre years of constitutional contortions, and parliamentary conventions were stretched to their very limits. However, on Monday, we topped them all when members opposite voted to breach the very same withdrawal agreement they voted for just months ago. You have to wonder, what is the point of making law and entering international agreement just months later the government seeks to overturn it? The same members opposite voted to breach the withdrawal agreement, had hailed the Prime Minister's renegotiation of it as a masterstroke, and then campaigned for it and then voted to enact it. I cannot compete with my friend, the Right Honourable Member for Doncaster North, in making the Prime Minister look like a petulant child, so I won't try. But I'll try to make the members opposite think about the damage they are doing to our international standing, to our individual reputations, and to the fabric of our union. And to a bill which could render the Good Friday Agreement asunder. I have some interest in constitutional law. I know the power it has to create new opportunities, to spread power to the people, to make decisions closer to where people live. But this bill is about putting the foot down the accelerator and driving the constitutional settlement off a cliff with the Union as its trailer. Clause 46 breaks the settled will of the devolved nations. So allow me to outline some of the problems with this bill. First of all, there is the executive power grab. It has enabling clauses. They enable a minister to make unilateral regulations. Secondly, there is the breach of existing law. The enabling clauses allow a minister to create regulations regardless of whether those regulations are in breach of domestic and international law. Let that sink in for a second before I carry on. We are giving ministers the power to break the law. Clause 46 allows pork barrelling, a US practice allowing for government spending for local projects to help a politician in their constituency. It allows pork barrelling by ministerial diktat and over the heads of devolved bodies. The bill not only creates a situation where the government is in breach of UK's obligations under the withdrawal agreement, but would provide the statutory basis for new regulations to be made by ministers also in breach of UK and international law. This does have recent precedent. The Coronavirus Act 2020 gave the Secretary of State for Health similar powers, which we saw implemented this week when the new health regulations were published allegedly 28 minutes before they came into force. So 29 minutes later, a family of 3 meeting a family of 4 could have been in breach of the law after a flick of the Secretary of State's pen with no warning. So soon we'll have 2 laws covering coronavirus and Brexit where ministers can create law by diktat. In the case of Brexit, break already agreed international law. You have to ask whether Parliament's only purpose will be to provide a body of persons